Abandoned, but unstoppable. What if Naruto mastered Kurama's power alone?
Hello everyone, welcome to What If Naruto became the perfect Jinchuriki after his first A-rank mission movie. Before we start, please go support Dragneel Slayer for writing that awesome fanfic. This is the translated version I made. There will be some mistaken characters' gender, but of course Naruto is a male. Demons exist and are much closer than anyone might think. Naruto Uzumaki is the Jinchuriki of the nine-tailed fox, information that after his first A-rank mission made him mature drastically, changing many aspects of his life, as well as his own companions and instructor. He was not willing to die for not receiving proper training. Chapter 1. The sound of the clock was constant. Tick-tock, breaking the monotonous silence of the night, which was sometimes accompanied by the hooting of owls and the chirping of crickets that, hidden in the vegetation of the village, were encouraged to sing every night while the moon shone high in the sky. But that night, it was slightly different from so many nights that the village of Konoha had spent, because one of its inhabitants was awake, lying on his bed with his arm covering his face, while he kept one leg bent, with his knee pointing towards the ceiling, as if it were a spear. The boy's room was in complete disarray. There were instant ramen containers scattered on the floor, on top of piles of dirty clothes, in the sink, and on the small table in the small living room that served as his room. A layer of dust was visible, even at night, on the furniture and the two paintings that decorated the room. The glass protecting the paintings had cracks in them, and they were slightly crooked, threatening to fall. If anyone looked into that room, they would see nothing but a dumpster, not a home, and even the boy lying there wouldn't be able to argue with anyone who called him out on the mess. Not only was the living room littered with ramen pots and expired milk cartons, but there were dirty clothes everywhere, and the sheets at the foot of the only bed, if you could call it that, in the house bore faint bloodstains that were only visible in sunlight or when the moon shone brightly enough on the fabric. And that mess perfectly represented the preteen inhabiting the bed, or rather the mental mess he was going through, the one that had him awake at 1 a.m. after the success of his first mission abroad. But it wasn't worrying about the mess that kept him awake, nor was it his eagerness for his next mission, which would likely be a D-rank mission again after the last one. No, what kept him awake was desperation for recognition, or rather, the lack of it. Although this had not previously kept him in that state, discovering why did, leaving him awake on that peaceful night, accompanied by the hooting of owls and the singing of crickets, with the complete absence of wind. Konoha was one of the 5 most important shinobi villages on the elemental continent. It was also the first village to be formed, thanks to the union of 2 of the continent's great clans, as well as an enormous power that won various battles and established itself as one of the greatest, giving birth to great shinobi over the years. Konoha could be considered strong and a beautiful and peaceful place to live, with the trees bearing green leaves most of the time and the sun shining steadily in the sky, giving warmth to the village during the day and creating a beautiful image, highlighting the contrast between the inhabitants and the vegetation. But even though Konoha was beautiful on the outside, what was it like on the inside? Thinking about that question, for a boy of barely 13, was painful and depressing, but he had to do it because he realized how dark the place where he lived was, more because of the people who forced him to look at reality than at his grandfather figure. Him, a 13-year-old boy, ostracized. This was what kept him awake after having discovered the secrets of his home and of what he was. A monster. That thought and that word sent a chill through her, causing her to press her lips together into a thin line that almost disappeared from her mouth completely, turning her lips as white as lime and almost drawing blood when one of his teeth pierced the skin of her lip. The metallic taste flooded her mouth for a few moments before disappearing, masked by the taste of saliva as she swallowed. But what had led a child to think he was a monster? Konoha didn't appear to be a place that would force a child to abandonment, nearly starve to death, and be singled out by everyone with hatred and contempt. But not everything was as it seemed. Now, after becoming a shinobi and surviving his first A-rank mission, the boy was able to fit the pieces together like a puzzle that slowly came together until the whole picture formed in his mind. And it was bleak. On the elemental continent, each of the 5 great villages had a Jinchuriki, a man or woman who carried a beast sealed inside, containing one of the 9 demons that could destroy the world. These people sacrificed themselves for the good of the continent, for all the people who lived in the world. Despite this sacrifice, people hated them, denying them even the possibility of a quiet life, a hot meal or a decent house. And, mostly, the ones who carried these demons were orphans. And he was one of these sacrifices. He discovered he was a Jinchuriki through one of his school teachers. This was reaffirmed when he fought Zabuza and Haku in the Land of Waves, where the power of the demon trapped within him helped him survive, destroying Haku's ice mirrors and resulting in victory. And the fact that he had been pushed, since childhood, into a world of resentment by everyone in the village only reaffirmed the fact that he was right in his thinking, in the dark idea that was slowly eating away at him. To him, it made perfect sense, and it gave even more meaning to some of the things that had happened in the village. The favoritism towards Sasuke. The poor teaching from the teachers during the academy. Kakashi's intention to place his partner over him, aside from the bloodline of his Uchiha partner, all of that had now made sense to him, becoming a fact, a reality. He was scorned, hated, and ignored simply because he was someone worth sacrificing. This thought was depressing and dark, creating a tightness in his chest. Despite knowing the truth, how could he change it now? How could he turn all that shadow projected toward him into a strong, warm light? The way, of course, wouldn't be with his current instructor and teammates. What good could there be in being with Sasuke Uchiha, a toxic boy, and Sakura Haruno, a girl who didn't care about shinobi training? Now that he thought about it, liking Sakura when she only looked down on him was truly pathetic behavior. I guess in order to change others, I have to change myself first. In order to become Hokage, I have to make them notice me, see me as an equal, and I can't do that if my instructor only notices Sasuke and I follow Sakura around like an idiot. He took a deep breath and sat up. A single tear trickled slowly down his cheek, but he caught it before it wet his neck, making it disappear as if it had never existed. Although no one would ever know that he had cried in that lonely room, with no one to comfort him. So the boy has finally decided to stand up and stop bowing his head. Okay, this is interesting. The hoarse voice of his tenant sounded with a mocking tone full of venom, like a reminder of what he had locked inside and that would always accompany him. I don't need your opinion, the boy scathingly responded to his inner demon and sat on the edge of the bed, his feet touching a container of ramen that was almost stuck to the side of the bed. I have enough with other people's intentions without worrying about yours, bag of bones. Ha. Bag of bones. Are you trying to insult me when you live in a garbage dump? Brat, you're the worst waste in this village, not me. You should see where you live, what you eat, and what you do before you even think about insulting me or trying to hurt my ego. You're light years ahead of being a mere human. Ha. The boy stood up, shaking his head as his feet touched some rotten noodles and some broth that turned out to be sticky. He didn't like to admit it, but the fox inside him was right. He'd come to that conclusion himself and decided to change, hadn't he? Because before changing things on the outside, he had to start by changing things on the inside, the things closest to his life. And his home was one of them. Despite the time, the boy began cleaning his house. He lived alone, without parents, siblings, or any other relatives, and the building had been completely abandoned except for him. No one wanted to be around a demon, much less one that knew the basics of killing anyone who bothered him. The instant ramen containers were the first to disappear into the trash, followed later by a large portion of her clothes, both dirty and clean, eliminating the orange outfits from her wardrobe without a trace of them. The last thing to accompany her clothes and food containers were several rags she used to clean the table, the floor, and the sink, as well as her room, removing dust, food scraps, and even dead spiders that had lurked in the corners of her house or under her bed. When she finished, the clock on the table read 7 a.m., a bright flickering red. I still have 4 hours until the meeting with Kakashi-sen with Instructor Haddock for some information he needs to give us, I suppose a report on the last mission. A little breakfast and training won't hurt. Do you really think a little food, a little house cleaning, and a change of style are going to make others think differently about you? Don't make me laugh. At least I can try to change the hatred of others or turn it into my strength, bag of bones. You, on the other hand, will bear the weight of everyone's hatred on your shoulders. The difference is, you're a demon, and I'm Naruto Uzumaki. And Uzumaki always keeps his promises. Chapter 2. The sun was high in the sky, its slender arms projecting its light and warmth over the village of Konoha, welcoming the villagers as they left their homes and began their chores or jobs. The streets had filled with people in a matter of 4 hours, and shinobi and civilians alike walked, some heading towards certain places and others maintaining vigilance and protection in the village, attentive to the movements of outsiders, which could be seen even from miles away by trained shinobi. On a bridge over a small river that ran through the village, 3 preteens were waiting for their instructor. They were 2 boys and a girl, the standard for a genin team currently in circulation. This method of teams of 3 was given that this was how squads like Anbu were usually formed. 3 subordinates and a squad leader, who in this case was the instructor. The reduced number of teams allowed the shinobi in circulation to work much more easily and always stay in pairs, which helped them raid certain locations and obtain hidden information on their targets. And the adult shinobi always saw fit to implement this method with the students as well, even if they didn't get along. Teamwork led to survival. Standing on the bridge, that thought made Naruto grimace uncomfortably, and he glanced at his 2 teammates who made up Konoha's Team 7. The small team under the supervision of Kakashi Haddock, one of the village's elite jonin who also became his teacher. Master, huh? The boy snorted at that definition in his mind of his team instructor. Beyond teaching them the tree-walking drill, Kakashi hadn't attempted to teach them any other branches of shinobi. In fact, after the mission in the Land of Waves, the missions became completely focused on D ranks, depriving them of the experience they would have gained on higher-ranking missions. Although that wasn't the worst of it. Genin usually only took on D or C rank missions, depending on the instructor in charge, in order to continue advancing in the ninja arts. Kakashi, as an elite Jonin and Sharingan user, should have taught his Genin better things than simple chakra control training, which would have made up for the lack of higher-ranking missions. But the man, completely blind, hadn't even delved into something as simple as Jujutsu, leaving them to fend for themselves. This might have worked if all three were members of prominent clans in the village. But of the three, only Sasuke had belonged to a clan and was trained by his family. Both he and Sakura, on the other hand, relied solely on the academy's teachings, which were deeply flawed and caused them immense problems, possibly even death. Naruto could be considered an idiot or an airhead, but he observed things and understood people differently, able to see the lies in their actions. Many people in Konoha, especially civilians, treated him differently than Sasuke, who was coveted as a national treasure, given what had happened to his family. He, on the other hand, was a simple stray dog with a terminal illness, a sacrifice to maintain the village's safety, as if he were being offered to some god. The word sacrifice made him growl through his teeth and squirm, drawing the attention of his companions. Sasuke looked at him indifferently, almost as always, but Sakura was a little more hostile than her companion, her pale green eyes flashing with malice. "Could you be happy, Naruto baka?" Sakura's voice made Naruto look at her, moving his head slightly, as if trying to recognize her. But the girl felt a slight chill run down her spine from the nape of her neck, like a spark. Even so, she didn't flinch and advanced toward him, ready to strike. "If I were you, I'd slow down, Haruno," Naruto said, pushing off the bridge's railing. "Or you might have an accident." Despite the unveiled threat, Sakura didn't sense the danger, and Sasuke ignored it, even as his companion's tone turned almost icy, lowering the temperature of the room. Because of this, the ensuing crunch and scream made Sasuke pull a kunai from its pouch, but his eyes widened. Naruto had blocked Sakura's blow and twisted the offending arm so that it formed an odd angle before giving way, crunching grotesquely and making the Uchiha think the bone was going to pop out through the skin. Luckily, Naruto shoved Sakura against the other railing of the bridge, freeing her limb. "Hey. What the hell is wrong with you, idiot?" Sasuke's scream, as well as Sakura's moments before, caused the birds to abandon their homes and scatter across the village sky, leaving the three completely alone. "She came to hit me, idiot," the Uzumaki hissed, now facing Sasuke. "I warned her that if she hit me she'd have an accident. And that's what happened." He moved his eyes to the kunai in his fellow Uchiha's hand. "Are you planning on running me through with it? Do you have the balls? What's going on here?" The three teenagers looked at Kakashi Haddock standing there, 3 leaves in his right hand, regarding them seriously. His voice, normally calm, had turned as hard as steel, and his only visible eye was fixed on the 2 boys on the team, though his concern was with his student, who was crying, her right arm limp, the bone broken. "Naruto attacked Sakura," Sasuke replied, still clutching the kunai tightly in his hand. "We were just having a good time when—" "Calm down. Don't make me laugh, idiot." Kakashi's attention shifted to Naruto. "She tried to hit me, and I warned her she'd have an accident if she kept at it. She didn't heed my warning, so I felt compelled to break her arm to impress upon her that actions have consequences." By this point, Kakashi was surprised. The first thing he noticed about his usually hyperactive and buffoonish student was the absence of orange and the abundance of black and gray in his clothes, which made him much more darker if possible. Also, when analyzing the situation with Naruto, he saw patterns that he didn't like. There was an absence of joy in his voice, and he didn't address Sakura with the term chan that he usually used, and even his treatment of Sasuke and the way he addressed him, his instructor, were different from what they usually were with Naruto. "First, we'll go to the Konoha hospital so they can examine your partner's injury. Then we'll go over some things, talk about the problem, and resolve whatever's going on between you. We can't go to the—" "We're not going to settle anything, Instructor Haddock. We also have nothing to discuss or review between Team 7 and me. You could say this," he pointed at Sakura, "and her injured arm is the immediate disbandment of Team 7. "What are you saying, Naruto?" Kakashi stood up to his full height while under his gaze, Sasuke's, and Sakura's tearful gaze, Naruto began to untie the ninja headband from his forehead, which fell at his feet. "What?" "I'm quitting, resigning, or abandoning, however you want to put it, Kakashi Haddock. I'm no longer a shinobi, and I'm no longer under your fruitless tutelage. I'd learn more from a monkey, honestly, and if I keep chasing this team, it'll lead to my death. You're getting it, brat. Ha 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 ha." Naruto didn't respond to his tenant's playful laughter. Instead, he threw the headband toward Kakashi, raising his head and staring with his blue eyes into the Jonin's half-hidden face, waiting for his reaction. But Kakashi remained silent, staring at his student's ninja headband at his feet, processing what had happened. Wasn't Naruto a hyperactive boy who wanted to be Hokage? Where was that boy now? Was he really giving up on his career? Is this why you hurt a colleague? I won't allow you to use that term, Instructor Haddock. Never. Naruto, pursing his lips, pointed at the adult. We're not partners, and we never were, just as you were never our teacher. Tree walking. Please. Both Haruno and I only know the basics, and you haven't even deigned to teach us. And you still talk your ear off calling us partners. When she hits me. As I said before and reaffirmed with the last mission in the Land of Waves. I don't intend to die because of you and your ineptitude. If Haruno wants to die and the Uchiha follows you like a dog on a leash, that's not my problem, Instructor Haddock. I'm leaving. Fine. Kakashi angrily closed his hand over the ninja headband resting in his palm, straining. Since you are no longer a member of Team 7 or a genin, I will report your actions to the third Hokage, as well as your conduct and disobedience, so that appropriate punishment can be meted out for whatever madness is happening to you, Naruto. If you don't stop it yourself, I will report everything that. Do whatever you want, Inu. It's all the same to me. You could lock me in a cell and I'd be happier than breathing the same air as you. Chapter 3. The Chunin exams were held twice a year and were held in different villages. It was common for village leaders to travel to the exam site to see their subordinates promoted. Also, the village hosting the exams would soon be filled with people from distant corners of the villages, foreigners eager to see their peers succeed, or merchants selling goods from other countries or villages. Trade increased significantly during the exams, leaving a huge amount of money for the village's coffers. But the Chunin exams not only brought a small amount of wealth, as well as possible alliances or secret pacts between villages, the Chunin exams were mostly used as a political event between village and country leaders, who would seek alliances between their old enemies to defeat a new one or avoid a war, but they also filled the village leader's office with hundreds, thousands of requests on an almost daily basis, as well as messages from other villages, and a lot more work than he usually had. On this occasion, the Chunin exams were being held in Konoha, so the person in charge of organizing everything related to the exams this time was none other than the third Hokage, the current leader of the village hidden in the leaves, one of the most important men in the Land of Fire, and a survivor of the three great shinobi wars that had occurred on the continent, being able to be classified as a living legend. Who was now completely confined in the Hokage Tower in command of the shinobi and taking care of the village. With the presence of the Chunin exams, his desk had been flooded with different scrolls for his review, as well as constant hourly reports from the sentries who were established on the perimeter of the village, both outside and inside of it, as a network to be able to capture any strange movement that could be an indication of danger. At 69 years old, Hiruzen Sarutobi could consider himself a fortunate man, as he was one of the few shinobi still alive at an advanced age, with a legacy behind him that extended his name to the rest of the countries. With his wrinkled face, his thin and wiry body, the third Hokage did not appear to be powerful or feared. However, he was in charge of training and forming the fearsome Sannin of Konoha, as well as fighting against Hanzo of the Salamander, and leading the village for the second time, due to the death of the fourth. Another younger Kage would have handled the exam preparations better than he did, and Hiruzen knew it, but there were no decent candidates to fill the fifth position. The only ones the old man could have in mind did not want to take the position or stay in the village. Exhaling a small cloud of smoke that escaped from his mouth, originating from the tobacco in his pipe, the third Hokage focused on the scrolls his secretary had left on the table that morning. Sales and trade permits, entry permits and other similar documents. Given the importance of a promotion and the trials themselves, they had had to arrange the participants' accommodations, as well as their accreditation. There were at least 200 participants spread across different hotels in the village, from different ninja villages and different countries, as well as some wandering ninja who seemed to want to take part in the trials. Per village to participate, it had to present at least one genin team, which meant 3 people had to show up on the day of the first test under the command and care of an instructor. Each village could present as many genin as they wanted, but the regulations meant they had to be presented in teams, not solo, as had been the case in the past. Of course, Hiruzen wouldn't deny the participation of solo shinobi and Kunoichi, but he would ask their leaders for explanations before admitting them. Now that the participants had begun to arrive, accompanied by their instructors and escorts, the invitation letter had to be sent to the leaders of the villages and countries, as well as to important figures on the continent. This event was not only intended to promote young and veteran genin, but also had a huge political undertone that the adults made no secret of. At an advanced age and with 3 wars under his belt, Hiruzen had already seen the politicking behind those tests, both the Chunin and Jonin exams, hidden from view. He even saw some clashes and the beginnings of a possible war between 2 enemy countries. And he hoped that wouldn't happen this year, in Konoha. An incessant knock on the office door brought the third Hokage out of his thoughts, which were all focused on the scrolls he was signing. Forward. The Hokage's tired eyes fixed on the figure of Kakashi Haddock, the Jonin instructor of Team 7, former Anbu member and student of the 4th Hokage. The man, with gravity-defying silver hair and a thin, lanky body, seemed somewhat worried, dejected, and quieter than usual. Kakashi. This is Naruto's. Kakashi reached the table that separated him from the 3rd Hokage and placed his blonde student's ninja headband on top of a pile of papers, forcing Hiruzen to look at it. The old man stood there for a few seconds, silent, staring at the design of the headband. There were no tears in the fabric or the rogue's mark in the metal. Seeing nothing strange about it, Hiruzen raised his gaze and fixed his dark eyes directly on the Jonin's visible eye, waiting for an explanation. This explanation didn't take long to arrive, as Kakashi swallowed and began to speak slowly, calmly, and confidently, trying to hide the anger hidden in his eyes and in the slightly sharp tone of his voice. Naruto Uzumaki has abandoned the shinobi ranks, leaving the sash at my feet. He broke his comrade Sakura's arm and didn't even stop to think about the consequences, as if they didn't matter to him. He threw the sash at me, rejected his comrades, and walked off, leaving us without any explanation. I don't know what happened, Hokage-sama, but it didn't seem serious. Somewhat slowly, Hiruzen took the ninja headband that Kakashi handed him, the one that had belonged to Iruka Yamino and now to Naruto Uzumaki, who had thrown it at his instructor's feet, which was disrespectful. Where did he go, Kakashi? At his house, Hokage-sama. I followed him after I took Sakura to the hospital and saw Sasuke, but I didn't try to talk to him. I don't think he wants to see me. Do you think the fox? That's unlikely. Hiruzen tucked his ninja sash into the folds of his robes and stood up, pushing back his chair and placing his quill on a piece of parchment, which remained unsigned. I'm going to handle this matter urgently, don't worry, Kakashi. You're dismissed. Hi. Naruto-kun, did you really do what Kakashi mentioned? But Naruto. Sweat trickled slowly, running down to the tip of his chin. When Naruto blinked, doing the 11th push-up using only his knuckles, it fell to the freshly cleaned floor, creating a slight popping sound as he performed another push-up, pushing his body upwards and using the floor for support. He wasn't using his legs. In fact, the push-up was straight up, with his feet pointing toward the ceiling, putting strain on his shoulders, wrists, and arms in general. But training the body was important. The shinobi had to be versed in different arts and branches, such as taijutsu, ninjutsu, jinjutsu, and kenjutsu, all of which relied on either the mind or the body of a user. He wasn't good with his mind, and his chakra control was poor due to the ineptitude of the academy's teachers, or more recently Kakashi. Because of this, Naruto had focused on the physical aspect, at least more prematurely, for his upcoming return to shinobi service. He hadn't completely abandoned his ninja path. He'd just gotten rid of the things that were dragging him down and would lead him to death. Kakashi, Sasuke, and Sakura were part of a much bigger problem, but if he wanted to get rid of that problem, to correct it, he had to get rid of the dead weights, those who weren't helping him. And Team 7 hadn't helped him at any point, not once. The knocking on the door startled Naruto, who nearly fell to the side. Taking a deep breath, filling his lungs with oxygen, he used his hands for support and pushed off, jumping upward. A second later he was on his bare feet, walking to the door and wiping his face with a small white towel. Hokage-sama. The 3rd Hokage stood on the other side of the door, accompanied by an Anbu woman with dark purple hair that cascaded down her upper back, her face hidden by a cat kabuki mask. Naruto-kun, the old man's eyes scanned the teenager before looking inside the house. It was clean, tidy, and not even a speck of dust could be seen. Here, Kakashi-kun gave me this. Naruto's eyes moved towards the ninja headband, and he took it from the Hokage's elderly hands. I'm not going. You've hurt a teammate and created distrust among your squad members. Of course, you're not going back to Kakashi's team, Naruto-kun. I'm not that stupid. The man entered the house, followed by the woman. Naruto, his eyes on the band, closed the door with some force. This is information that only a few people know, so you should stay calm. I don't care who knows it or not, Hokage-sama. You already know that I'm the fox's Jinchuriki, right? All the adults who took me away from their children. Let them know that the monster has. You're not a monster, and you're not the fox, the 3rd said in a deep voice, halting the younger man's words, looking at him more intensely. Have you finally put the pieces together and decided to turn against your companions? Naruto's eyes hardened, and the Hokage watched as he clenched his fists, squeezing them until veins began to pop out under the boy's skin. Everyone has treated me like an outcast for as long as I can remember, old man. The shopkeepers, the nurses, the teachers, there isn't a single person outside of the shinobi who has treated me well besides Tucci and his daughter. And I was just a kid. He swallowed hard and took a deep breath, calming his anger partially. I thought joining Team 7 with Sasuke and Sakura would be the best thing that would ever happen to me, that someone would finally teach me how to be a ninja and not just ignore me or kick me out of class for not paying attention. But Kakashi was even worse, taking a liking to Sasuke when we were all supposed to be on the same team. I'm angry at Kakashi for his negligence as a teacher. I'm tired of having to carry Sasuke's ego on my back and, above all, I'm tired of Sakura's contempt of her self-centered and stupid look every time she talks about Sasuke, impregnating each word with her disgusting voice. Both of them looked at each other, and Hiruzen saw the harshness of the words reflected in her gaze. If I have to keep receiving blows, contempt and being treated like the last monkey, then I prefer not to continue being a shinobi, Hokage-sama. For that I already have all the adults. The harshness of the words that came out of the boy's mouth made the elderly Hokage tremble slightly, who thought he would finally fall, but he ended up recovering. Every one of the words spoken by Naruto was an unquestionable truth that Hiruzen knew to be true, even if the boy did not openly tell him so. Being branded as a demon, as the contender of a monster, led the adults to despise the boy, since that same monster destroyed the village 13 years ago, despite the fact that he, as military leader, forbade telling anything to the younger generations, including Naruto himself. Despite this, the adults showed their contempt for the boy, and it spread to many of their children and grandchildren. Naruto. Don't come talking about the will of fire, Hokage-sama. Don't you dare. You're supposed to be the village's military leader, and you allow all this. The boy gestured to his room, pain showing in his eyes. If you decide to mention the will again, I swear that. No, I'm not going to mention the will of fire, nor am I going to continue trying to talk about the good of the village or the good you have to do to get them to notice you. I'm not even going to talk about your team or Kakashi, not when I can see that you would be capable of killing either of them. If I keep pushing you any further than I already have in these 13 years. The old man breathed heavily, feeling the weight of his actions on his shoulders. On some occasion, you asked me about your parents, right? And I always kept it a secret for different reasons that could probably be useless or really serious. But let me tell you, Naruto, that your parents were great shinobi and people in almost every way. Loving parents who expected a child murdered on the night of his birth. But why did I hide who they are until now? Because yes, today you will know who your parents are. Hiruzen walked around the room slowly, looking at how clean it was. We'll go back almost 14 or 15 years, because doing so any longer is unnecessary. The third great ninja war was taking place, and there were different fronts open. Konoha was pitted against Kumo and Iwa, our two greatest rivals. Almost all the ninja villages were fighting, whether large or small, but we'll focus on the aforementioned. As you know, Iwa and Kumo are two great ninja villages, two powerhouses on the continent. Kumo has greater military power, even more so than Konoha, and Iwa has skilled ninjas, as well as two Jinchuriki within its ranks, with enormous experience and power. Kumo also has two, by the way. The old man stopped in front of the window and looked at the houses of Konoha's red light district. Your father and mother made enemies in those villages. Your father ended the war, killing 60 Iwa shinobi and ending the conflict, becoming a legendary shinobi and feared by great shinobi today. Okay, with that out of the way, if you've been paying attention in class, you should know that your father can be none other than Minato Namikaze, the fourth Hokage, the yellow flash of Konoha. You paint his face every day. A small smile appeared on the old man's face. Now, who is your mother? It was avoided at all times that anyone gave you your father's surname for safety reasons. Kumo and Iwa would have killed you, and your pregnancy was kept secret, as well as Minato's wedding. But, anyway, your father's clan doesn't matter. The Uzumaki are more influential, with more political power and funds. If he had been forced to, Minato should have been called Uzumaki. It's strange, in fact, that no one looks at you by the surname, which came from your mother. Kushina Uzumaki, the bloody habanero. Former vessel of the nine-tailed demon fox. Hiruzen took a deep breath. Minato and Kushina made powerful enemies who would undoubtedly come after your head, whether your parents died or not. Now, as you well know, your father died fighting the nine-tailed fox. Your mother died as well, protecting you as you were turned into the demon's vessel. Your parents sacrificed you for the sake of other children and the village's civilians, at the cost of your happiness. In turn, they died after being impaled on a claw, using their bodies as a shield for their son. Few in the village know of this, mostly high-ranking shinobi or council members. The information that you were the demon's vessel spread despite my attempts to stop the leak. But I was able to prevent any mention of it to the younger ones. I'm not trying to justify the village or myself, nor am I trying to justify your parents. The Hokage reached inside his robes and pulled out a scroll, which he handed to the young man. I wanted to wait to see if you became a Chunin or reached a more mature age to give this to you. But I think it's about time you could take up your parents' legacy. That, of course, would mean you remaining an active Konoha ninja. I'm not going to make you go back to Kakashi. The old man had raised his hand, stopping Naruto. But I'm not going to allow you to throw your life away and make it miserable, either. I have a couple of people, and Team 11 can be brought back into circulation, if you want. Naruto's mind had begun to process all the information, all the data and words from the third. Were his parents war heroes? Did he have a will? Did they make him a Jinchuriki? You don't need to answer now, Naruto. You have 15 days. Until then the Anbu woman stepped forward. This woman will be your instructor. Nico of the Anbu. Chapter 4. The mind was one of the most important tools for any person, especially for those who had to face various situations that could push a human's sanity to the edge of a dark and uninspiring precipice. Therefore, the Ansatsu Senjutsu Takushu Butai, Special Assassination and Tactics Squad, or Anbu for short, had to pass a harsh mental examination to see if they were ready or not for the life they would lead once they hid their faces behind a mask, removing their lives from any source of leisure or fun, and serving the village 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, even on holidays. Hiruzen Sarutobi believed, drawing on his long experience as a shinobi, that the best person to educate a genin with problems like Naruto's could be none other than an Anbu, a shinobi ready to face things worse than death itself. To always be surrounded by the coldest solitude. But what Anbu would want to take care of a 13-year-old boy without reporting his actions to the council or the elders? On the entire list of members of the organization, the old Hokage only found 4 names who could have fulfilled the mission. But 3 of them were no longer in the organization, and that led him to use Nico for the job. Man or woman? Anbu weren't designated by their hex, but by their abilities, and the one known as Nico, who was a truly lethal woman, was the best teacher Hiruzen could find for the boy with time already on his shoulders. He couldn't waste minutes or seconds looking for another teacher, they probably wouldn't want to help the boy, and he preferred to get the matter closed before the Chunin exams arrived, where Naruto would have to participate whether he wanted to or not. Although Hiruzen didn't care about the boy's participation, other high-ranking officials in the village were expecting to see how the fox's container had grown, to see if they could use it for their own benefits, or if it was just waste. Better late than never. After almost a week after speaking with Naruto, the third was back in his office, behind the huge table, being watched by his personal Anbu team, waiting for the people with whom he had scheduled a meeting to talk about the formation of a new team. Normally, Konoha had 10 circulating teams of genin, all under the watchful eye of a jonin instructor with the appropriate skills. But that didn't mean a team couldn't be created if necessary, no matter the case, though it would have to have the approval of the village leader. Fortunately for Hiruzen himself, he was the one leading the village, even if it didn't seem that way to the common people or his political enemies. A new team would mean more military power deployed on the ground, even if it was just a few genin. But I had the chance to use Team 11 again. The office door opened with a soft creak, halting the quill on the paper. Hiruzen Sarutobi raised his head and placed the quill in the inkwell to his right, near his hand. He clasped his hands together and looked at the 3 people in front of him. A woman and a pair of teenagers who were looking at him with some anticipation, probably having been called into his office. "I'm sorry I called you at this time," he began, looking first at the woman. "How have you been, Anko?" Anko Mitarashi was a woman with strands of hair and brown eyes, with a body with slight curves, generated by the constant movement of training, and her training as a kunoichi. She was young, about 24 years old, and an expert in poisons and snakes, having also been the pupil of a well-known ninja. "Lord Third," the woman nodded, and the boys bowed. "I've been doing well, preparing for the second test of the Chunin exams, nothing much to report." "How are you doing with the brand?" The woman's lips pursed. "It's more than a little annoying," he admitted, massaging his neck lightly, almost unconsciously, "but it's something I can cope with, or rather, something I've learned to cope with. Orochimaru is a cruel man, but also extremely brilliant. When we find a way to remove this mark, we will do it without hesitation, okay?" At the woman's nod, the old man's eyes shifted to Anko's companions. "You, if I recall correctly and from my information, are Ryu Uzumaki and Akeno Uchiha." Ryu was a slender 14-year-old boy, with a slightly muscled and athletic body from ninja training. He had blood-red hair that reached almost to his shoulders, and his left eye was a cyan color that almost resembled a gemstone. The other was hidden under his ninja headband, and his chin was protected by the navy blue fabric that accompanied his attire, almost as if he had been a pupil of Kakashi Haddock in the attire. Akeno, on the other hand, dressed more simply. Dark pants, a tight-fitting t-shirt of the same color as her pants, and forearm guards. Like any Uchiha, Akeno had raven black hair falling just below her mid-back, and her onyx-like eyes shone silently in a snowy, heart-shaped face. "Hokage-sama." Ryu is excited to have met the Hokage. Therefore, Ryu wants to give him a gift. "Ham." Ryu's words died away as Akeno hit him, causing the boy to bite his tongue. "You're both Konoha shinobi. Ryu, you lost your team, and you're still a genin. On the other hand, your situation hasn't allowed you to serve as a kunoichi, Akeno. You're both valuable Konoha genin, and I have a mission for the three of you. The mission? Appearing confused, Anko spoke before the two teenagers. We're on the verge of the Chunin exams. I can't abandon preparations for the second test, Hokage-sama. I don't think the old folks would like me to be free, Lord Hokage, the young Uchiha frowned. He doesn't like it very much that I disobey him and go free. Ryu doesn't care much for the opinions of insects, old Hokage. But Ryu thinks taking on a mission like this wouldn't be fun. Ryu wants. Pam. Once again, Akeno silenced Ryu by hitting him. The elderly are the exams that doesn't matter as much to me as the four of you being happy for once in your lives, doing what you want. 4. Yes, Anko, 4. I want Team 11 back in circulation. With Naruto. The sound of metal against metal frightened the birds, which spread their wings and scattered across the sky, forming dark specks that gradually grew smaller. Surrounded by trees and under the watchful eyes of some deer from the Nara estate, two figures moved through the branches, colliding with each other in brief movements that produced reddish sparks, as if two metallic shapes had collided. After several seconds, the faster figure finally forced the slower one to crash, becoming entangled in the vegetation, its legs sticking out of a bush and a kunai, probably the one it had used in the fight, stuck in the ground. When the fight stopped, the deer began to move again, moving away from that place, and on one of the highest branches of a tree, the Anbu Nico observed the figure of her most recent student with hardly any emotion in her gaze, which was completely hidden by the mask. Several seconds and attempts later, Naruto was back on his feet, brushing off a few leaves from his shirt, the inside of his clothes, and a few twigs from his messy hair, which led him to remove a worm from a strand of hair. This, of course, elicited a light laugh from the woman, which sounded like the soft jingle of bells, and made the boy glare at her with icy daggers. You'll see when I catch you, Nico-san. You still have years to go before you can do it, the woman skillfully slid down from the branch and landed on her feet, her hair trailing purple behind her. But you're quite fast and sneaky, if I do say so myself. Coloring the faces of previous Hokages and never getting caught is an under-recognized feat. However, you might want to think a little about why you weren't caught. What do you mean? I beat them. HMP, is that it or should we just let you do it? With a crooked smile, seeing the boy's ego slightly crushed, Nico pointed at her student with her index finger. Because, if you were really fast, not even Iruka could have caught you, brat. TSK. Naruto took out two kunai and held them in reverse. As Nico had taught him, he sent chakra to his legs and shot towards the woman, showing a confident smile. But she was already expecting him and blocked the kunai with her short sword. You should consider whether or not my words might hurt your pride, Uzumaki. She pushed hard, sending Naruto sprawling backward, allowing her to drive her foot directly into his stomach, sending him flying several meters. The mind and body must be one, and your emotions must be restrained so you can think and not lash out in anger or resentment. That would lead you to. Crack. Nico's eyes widened slightly before she jumped back, evading a second Naruto who emerged from the ground intending to strike her. And you shouldn't underestimate me. Shadow clones, I guess the Hokage's words were real. Naruto blinked. Did the old man tell you about me? You defeated Mizuki, a Chunin rank shinobi. You participated in the mission to the Land of Waves, where you faced an A rank shinobi and survived. In both cases, you used the forbidden jutsu known as shadow clones, a jutsu superior to regular clones. Of course, I know a few more things, but they're not important now. As far as these days are concerned, you've worked satisfactorily and made steady progress. We'll continue working on your physique until the exams begin and on your chakra control and mental health. Once we've completed that, the rest will follow. Thump. Teacher and student moved almost simultaneously, in sync, and watched the three people who entered the clearing. Seeing the woman walking in front of two teenagers, Nico visibly relaxed, something Naruto noticed. Anko, the Anbu woman murmured, letting out a sigh. You almost gave me a heart attack. Hahaha. That wasn't my intention, replied Orochimaru's former pupil, stopping 2 meters away from her friend and new student. Naruto Uzumaki. The eyes of the three new people moved directly towards Naruto. Yeah? Let me introduce myself. I'm Anko Mitarashi, your new Jonin instructor. These are Akeno Uchiha and Ryu Uzumaki. Together, you will be the new Team 11. Chapter 5. Genin teams were formed by 3 students graduating from the academy who could generate some sort of decent teamwork to survive outside of a shinobi village, although this was at the discretion of the team instructor, who would always test his students to see if they were still suitable or would be placed in reserve teams or dismissed from the force, something that didn't happen very often. Genin were rarely expelled, and even to achieve expulsion, the person would have to have committed something truly serious. Generally, the instructors took notes, learned from their students, and discussed with the leader their abilities and possible positions to fill once they reached the rank of Chunin, which would then disband the team and assign its number to other genin. Anko had never been an instructor and was merely a jonin specializing in poisons and interrogation, as well as snakes and antidotes, skills acquired from her first master. Thanks to that knowledge, she rose to the position of Takubetsu and had worked on special missions for which her skills were needed. She even saved some comrades from little-known poisons and obtained information for some vital missions. So how did she end up being placed in charge of 3 orphan preteens and living a miserable life like hers? Naruto Uzumaki was the Jinchuriki of the Demon Fox and was ostracized by the village itself and the insecurities of the people. Akeno Uchiha was the only woman of the Uchiha clan still alive, being hidden by the elders of the council and placed under the care of one of its members, which said a lot for the third Hokage to risk having the girl under his protection. And finally, Ryu Uzumaki was a member of a previous genin team, but he was left behind in the ranks. Forgotten for his rebelliousness and his unethical actions when completing a mission. Anko, her team was a team of social misfits, village outcasts. No one would miss them, neither her nor her students. But she was fine with not being missed when the worms devoured her, but the boys. That was something she hated about the village. Looking down on poor children, pushing them to the edge of the precipice, that was how the most terrifying villains were created, and just the thought of one of her new students being a villain made her shudder from head to toe. Luckily, none of the 3 boys could see her or catch the slight movement of her body. Naruto, Akeno, and Ryu were looking for her, intending to complete the bell training to show her they were well coordinated, something she had to admit. However, experience was on her side. And she had lived in a somewhat darker time. Taking a deep breath and closing her fingers around the wire, Anko finally decided to reveal herself to her students when they appeared in the clearing. She did it differently, though. She pulled on the wire, making a slight clicking sound, and then leaped up onto the branch just above her head, leaving the bush. They also let go of the cable. Shinobi were known for their jutsus, though these were the last resort of those with the greatest skills, as what usually prevailed in a shinobi or kunoichi was stealth, speed, reflexes, cunning, and intelligence, much more than launching a powerful destructive jutsu that would attract the enemy's attention. And Anko was not a woman lacking in intelligence or cunning, as evidenced by the smile on her face and the mischievous glint in her eyes. Plank. Chang. The earth shattered the second Anko released the ninja cable, cracking, creating a cloud of dust and debris that barely managed to hide the iron teeth that tried to catch the 3 preteens who were engulfed in this dust, blocking their vision and dulling their hearing. It's a trap. Naruto wrinkled his nose and, sending chakra to his feet, jumped seconds before being caught in a massive trap that would have shattered his bones and flesh. Though if you looked closely, it looked like a collapsible cage that had been raised at its owner's command. It almost looked like a giant bear trap. Naruto, Akeno, and Ryu scattered across the clearing, each landing on a different branch of the same tree, eager to see what might happen and what their instructor had in store for them. The bell test was supposed to be a test of teamwork, or at least that was how Kakashi had used it so far. For Anko, it was different. There weren't just 2 bells, but 3, so the pressure of one of them dropping out was eliminated. This completely changed the test, and Anko didn't see any real problem with it. She wasn't about to judge her students' performance by putting pressure on them. She wanted to see how they truly worked as a team against a common enemy. And to do that I was going to put pressure on them. Did you hear that? Akeno and Ryu looked at Naruto with some confusion and uncertainty, and the blonde-haired Uzumaki turned his head back, giving his back to Anko, who was in the tree in front of them, several meters away from them. I don't think Ryu heard anything. Ryu has such keen hearing, it would surprise senpai. I highly doubt you'll hear anything more than your own words, Akeno muttered, disagreeing with the repeated statement. There's nothing there, Uzumaki. We should focus on finding Anko and rest for tomorrow. I've heard that several strong teams are taking the exam with us, one of them being Konoha's Team 9. They have a year's worth of experience ahead of us. A year on you alone, Akeno-senpai. Ryu has thousands of years of experience over. Pam. Would you shut your mouth, idiot? I swear to God, if another piece of bullshit comes out of your lips. Crack. The 3 of them reacted quickly, even talking to each other as if they weren't in a test. Akeno leaped back as Ryu leaped upward, onto another branch above. Naruto, however, covered himself with his arms and felt the darkness close in on him, engulfing him. Idiot. Plank. Kunai and Tantan collided, releasing a few sparks, and Anko reacted by pushing Akeno with her body, separating her from the enormous brown snake that had engulfed Naruto and away from Ryu, who became the target of a second snake. Arguing in the middle of a test, she took a deep breath and bent down. The Tantan snipped a few tiny strands of her bun, but she ignored it. She used her elbow to strike Akeno in the chest, sending her several steps back while spitting out some saliva. That was your worst decision. The shurikens suddenly appeared, creating a whistling sound in their wake. Following years of training, Anko evaded the projectiles and, using a kunai, caught one of the shuriken as she pivoted on her foot, sending the projectile hurtling directly toward Akeno, who dodged it by moving her head to the right. Pine, a red line appeared on her cheek. Even such quiet girls can bleed. Thump. Anko and Akeno collided for the second time. The mocking smile on the purple-haired woman's lips was directed solely at the teenager in front of her. She, of course, narrowed her eyes, sensing the woman's mockery as she tried to dig into her head to ignite the flame of anger. But she was different from the others, an Uchiha with a certain degree of temper. She stomped down, consolidating her position. Like Anko had done before, Akeno ducked her body and swung her arm upwards, pushing the tandem skyward. This sent her instructor's kunai flying backward, creating an imbalance that caused Anko to fall slightly forward. This was something the girl had expected as she tucked her body in and shoved Anko slightly, causing the woman to fall on top of her like a sack of potatoes. Once she felt the woman's breasts on her back, she threw her to the ground in one fluid motion, causing her to collide with her own back. I wasn't going to fall for the same game twice. The senbon shot out and the tandem's blade swung, deflecting some of the projectiles, almost invisible to the ordinary human eye. However, the onyx color was gone, and a bloody hue took its place, with 3 blades spinning furiously as they pointed directly at the woman. Ah, the girl has claws. Anko licked her lips, enjoying her student's dangerous gaze. She loved danger, the adrenaline rush of being on the brink of death or being hunted. She was, in a way, masochistic on a little understood but enjoyable level. She was a dangerous woman who worked for the torture department. Seeing suffering in other eyes was satisfying to her. Clink. Kunai and Tant met again and sparks flew for the 3rd or 4th time, and then several more times as the Uchiha tried to cut off her instructor's head, and, at the same time, Anko defended herself from her student's precise lashes, which were increasingly faster and more accurate. Plank. Anko took distance by throwing 2 kunes that forced Akeno to defend herself, deflecting one and dodging the second, and creating a space of 10 or 12 meters between the two. Akeno's Jujutsu skills were actually quite decent, and with the help of the Sharigan, they became even more lethal and dangerous, although her weaknesses in hand-to-hand combat could be seen due to her inexperience. Akeno had likely been trained from a young age, perhaps by her parents or a clan elder, which contributed to her excellent hand-to-hand combat skills. In a few years she's going to be a lethal woman. A huge puff of smoke caught the attention of the two, who could not retain their interest towards the large amount of white smoke that had appeared in the forest, as if an explosion had taken place, although neither could say if they heard any explosion, since the smoke appeared suddenly. Amp. Anko jumped back, and 2 figures crashed into the spot where she had previously been. That was disgusting. The colorless, sticky slime dripped from Naruto's outstretched limbs, falling directly onto the grass. He was completely drenched, his hair plastered to his forehead, his face covered in the stuff, and his clothes completely wet and sticky, so much so that he had trouble even walking. PFFFT, ha 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 ha. Stop laughing, Anko. I can't. This is to take a picture. I can't believe you escaped from a snake and arrived completely wet from its saliva. Ha 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 ha. That's not funny. Why did you throw a snake at my ass, witch? Ha 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 ha. Stop laughing. Subtly, Akeno had covered her lips with her hand, hiding a slight smile that had formed on them at the image of her teammate completely covered in saliva, almost as if he had been licked by a giant tongue. Ryu thinks Naruto-senpai looks really funny like this. Maybe you want to change your clothes. Or do you want a lemon for your troubles? Shut up. Naruto pushed Ryu away. I'm going to get that bell. The FFT, I'd like to see you try. Shaking her head, Anko looked into the genin's bright blue eyes. Anyway, your time's up. Come on. It's time to go home. The Chunin exams start tomorrow. Chapter 6. Room 301 of Konoha's academy was packed with genin from other villages. Kumagakure, Iwagakure, Kusagakure, Atogakure, all of them formed teams of 3, scattered throughout the room, focused on conversations with their classmates. If someone looked at the participants of the first stage, they could see the absence of genin from Kurigakure, the village hidden in the mist, also known as the village of the Bloody Mist for its infamous genin exams. The current civil war that the Land of Water was having on its territory had prevented the youngest ones from being able to participate in the recent exams, and it was the only village absent from room 301. All the other villages were present, including many of the smaller ninja villages that were able to send a genin team. Among the genin teams present in classroom 301, several of the genin present stood out. The team formed by the 4th Kazukiyage's children stood apart, far from their opponents, with the youngest of the brothers with his arms crossed over his torso. The only team present from the Sound Village stood on the opposite side of the arena team, with its 3 members talking to each other in whispers, as if they didn't want anyone to hear them. The group of veterans from the Leaf Village were laughing briefly at the front of the class, waiting for those who were arriving after them. The present team from Kusagakure remained silent in the northeast part of the room, with their leader wearing a straw hat that hid his face, along with his long black hair that cascaded down. And the only team that Kumo had sent seemed uneasy, nervous, and their eyes darted around in all directions, as if they were expecting to be attacked by the examiners or the genin present in the classroom. That academy classroom was filled with dangerous opponents, shinobi and kinwaichi far more dangerous than ordinary genin fresh out of the academy. Any expert who took a quick look at the people in that classroom could sense the danger radiating from most of those present. This is intense. Konoha's Team 10, led by Asuma Sarutobi, were the first to arrive at classroom 301, led by the team's only girl, a preteen with golden hair, fair skin, and green eyes, with a thick lock of hair falling down the right side of her face. Problematic. Shikamaru Nara, a young man with black hair, a slim build, and slightly tanned skin, let his thoughts escape with a familiar word. Like any member of the Nara clan, Shikamaru preferred to stay away from any complications that arose before him, although on this occasion it was impossible. Yum. Despite the hostile glares Team 10 received from their upcoming rivals, Choji Akimichi, a young man with brown hair, swirl marks on his cheeks, and a robust body, continued to shove potato chips into his mouth, causing a twitch to appear on his teammate Ino Yamanaka's right eyebrow. "Would you stop eating?" she whispered, trying not to draw too many eyes to her. "They're watching us." Taoji ignored his companion's words, throwing the remains of the chips into his mouth and chewing hard, leaving not even a few crumbs inside the bag. "I ran out of potatoes." We're the first to arrive, Shikamaru sensed the potential problems of becoming targets, halting his friend's words and calmly looking at Ino. The girl swallowed and nodded before those dark eyes. "It's better to stay in a corner and wait for someone who might attract those eyes. They give me the creeps, if I'm being completely honest." The classroom doors opened again, and Konoha's teammate made an appearance, led by a young man with red marks on his cheeks, a challenging look and a mocking smile. A small white dog was hidden under the hood of the brown-haired young man, probably a Ninken ninja dog, indicating that the young man was an Inyazuka. "Hey Shika. Kiba." Shikamaru's thought became reality when Kiba spoke forcefully. Several pairs of eyes moved, boring into teammate, causing the female member to shiver at the intensity of their gazes. "You're always the first to arrive," the Inyazuka declared, walking towards Team 10 accompanied by Hinata Hyuga, a young woman with milky skin, dark blue hair, wide eyes typical of her clan and a shy expression, and also by Shino Abiram, a young man with dark hair, eyes hidden by dark round glasses, and his face slightly hidden by the collar of his coat. "I thought that, for once, and more so because of your lazy personality, we could be the first to arrive." "I had to drag him out of his house," Ino admitted, grateful for teammates' presence. "Do you know if Sasukun's team is going to show up?" If Team 7 was going to take the Chunin exams, all of Konoha's rookies would be present, which included Team 9, which was under the training of Maido Gai, and was the only genin team in Konoha with a full year of training, before taking their first Chunin exam, which said a lot about Team 9's instructor. Troublesome. If they show up, so will Naruto. All the young people of Konoha knew Naruto. They had been classmates at the academy, and some of them had been classmates with the Uzumaki. They knew of his hyperactive nature, his quick-tempered mouth, his poor composure, and his poor grades at the academy. In the eyes of more than one person, Naruto could be considered the dead weight of Team 7. Although if what my father told me is true. Shikamaru thought about recent events for his blonde-haired teammate. He had participated in and survived a confrontation with a shinobi katana. He had left Team 7 after an argument with his instructor and teammates. He had learned shadow clones, a forbidden technique, and was now on a new team under the training of a new instructor. Though he couldn't confirm that information. But could his father lie to him? "Sasuke-kun. Don't come anywhere, you pig." "Shut up, big forehead." The screams caught the attention of the young Nara, as well as that of the Akimichi, the Inyazuka, the Abiram and the young Hyuga. Team 7 had finally arrived at classroom 301, but with an unexpected change for the rest of Konoha's rookies. "Hey, Uchiha." Kiba's brown eyes looked at a dark-haired young man standing next to Sasuke, hiding his face in a flat white porcelain mask, with two thin slits for eyes. "What happened to that idiot Naruto? Did he dye his hair and become just as emo as you?" The Inyazuka's mocking smile was directed directly at the strange masked man from Team 7, who didn't seem to be offended by the brunette's gesture. He didn't even say a word and stood with his hands in his pockets, his face clearly directed towards Kiba, the slits of his mask pointing directly at him. "Don't be an idiot," Sakura growled. "Naruto's been removed from Team 7, and they've made Kaido our new partner. That idiot Naruto broke my arm. He sulked for some reason and quit the band, the team, and his career as a ninja." "Is that true?" Despite not treating Naruto well or having been a friend to him, Ino found Sakura's words strange. Naruto abandoning his career as a shinobi. As if that were even possible. Naruto had always made clear his dream of becoming the Hokage of Konoha, of replacing Hiruzen Sarutobi as the village's leader. Would he give that up over a simple argument with his classmates? I need a little more information. As if reading his partner's mind, Shikamaru verbalized Ino's thoughts and looked at the two boys from Team 7, who were his classmates at the academy with a questioning look. Why would Naruto, a boy who followed you around like a dog, break your arm? I'll be honest, Sakura, Naruto following you around like an idiot is the most ridiculous thing he's ever done, and I'm glad he finally opened his eyes. But breaking your arm? The Naruto I know wouldn't have done that without a good compelling reason. Are you going to defend a comrade who hurts others? The masked man's soft voice caught the rookie's attention. Someone who hurts his comrades like that idiot shouldn't be part of the village's shinobi anymore. He might end up killing a comrade out of pure selfishness. Naruto, murderer. Please. Ino frowned. He may be a hyperactive idiot, but murderer. Don't make me laugh. Assassins are people we don't expect, the masked man replied, shrugging. Luckily, we won't have to deal with him much longer. The paperwork for him to abandon his career is already underway. It won't be long before word gets out that Naruto Uzumaki is a complete failure who hasn't amounted to anything. Words filled with venom and malice. Kaido didn't speak with words filled with love, affection, or respect for his fellow genin, but rather with an inherent malice that came from the depths of his heart, permeating his words, something the boys sensed without even having to pay attention to their new partner's voice. If you say so. Biba shook his head and almost growled like a dog. Naruto being treated like that. He wasn't the Uzumaki's best friend and they weren't good companions, but he couldn't allow such disrespect, something he shared with Ino, who frowned and frowned at those venomous words. Shikamaru, Shino, and Choji, on the other hand, showed a more serious expression at the tone, and Hinata only shuddered. Come on. You're all drawing too much attention to yourselves, and that's not a good thing. The gray-haired man approached the Konoha rookies, displaying a conciliatory smile, likely in an attempt to ease the tension between the preteens. His eyes were black, protected by circular glasses, and his hair was tied in a ponytail that fell to his upper back. A Konoha ninja headband was on his forehead. And who are you? Biba almost barked, his growing anger emerging at Kaido's words, who only snorted at the Inyazuka's angry tone, knowing it was meant for him. The man raised an eyebrow, but ignored the anger in that voice. My manners don't seem too appropriate, please excuse me. My name is Kabuto Yakushi, a veteran genin of Konoha. He's a little old for a genin. Kabuto looked at Sasuke and smiled. It's difficult to pass the Chunin exam, young Uchiha. I've retaken this exam about 7 times, which indicates its complexity, don't you think? Konoha isn't the only one participating in these exams, and the times I've failed have provided me with information from many people in this room. Eyes darkened by those words, they glared at Kabuto dangerously, from different directions. No shinobi was willing to reveal their secrets, and they couldn't allow another person, an enemy, to reveal information about them. That interests me. Sasuke took a step toward Kabuto, drawn to the implication of his words. Can you give me information on anyone in this room? Of course. Whose? The doors flew open and a young man came sliding along the floor on his knees, like some kind of musical star, his arms raised to the sky. Ryu arrived first. Ryu is a good boy and he arrived first to the exam room. The first stage's participants' attention shifted to the young man with red hair. Ryu was still wearing his cloth mask covering the lower part of his face, and the headband covered his right eye, unlike Kakashi Haddock. He was wearing black Anbu pants, a sleeveless shirt, and what looked like a dark gray bulletproof vest over the shirt. What the F? Ryu idiot. A young woman strode forcefully into the classroom. Drops of purple dye dripped from her chin, the tips of her hair, and the folds of her clothing, creating a pool of paint beneath the teenager's feet. Akeno Uchiha's previously black hair was now a deep purple. Now, the eyes of the first phase participants shifted to the duo of Team 11 members. The Konoha rookies twitched, seeing their village's headband on both of their foreheads, not recognizing them. Not even Team 9 knew those two. You dyed my hair purple, you idiot. Ryu thinks purple suits you. Ryu thinks purple is Akeno-chan's color. Don't use the chan. The girl's hands grabbed Iridide's neck and began to shake him over and over again, making Ryu's head move as if she was affirming over and over again, until, finally, Akeno slammed her own head against Ryu's and knocked him down, the latter showing a budding bump on his forehead. Akeno-senpai is very cruel. The whimpering wasn't long in coming. Writhing on the ground, Ryu covered his forehead with his hands, exaggerating the blow he'd received. This action made Akeno's lips twist in annoyance, and her dark eyes glittered with a certain danger, as if she were a wild animal scrutinizing its prey. Leave him alone, Akeno. If you kill him, we'll probably be kicked out of the exam because there won't be 3 of us on the team. Other footsteps were heard coming from the hallway. There was no orange when Naruto appeared, entering classroom 301, and his blue eyes were slightly darkened, matching the black and gray clothing that now covered his body, a change that seemed to pleasantly attract female attention, as the black and gray matched his golden hair and blue eyes. But she dyed my hair purple. Blue-black eyes met briefly, the black ones showing an intense fire. Then, Naruto shrugged, still keeping his hands in his pants pockets. If he dies, we'll be rejected from the exams. But I must kill him. I didn't say you shouldn't, just wait until you pass at least the first test, he replied, flashing a small, mischievous smile. That way we'd have an excuse to ditch the exams. Naruto-senpai is cruel. Is that Naruto? Surprise was in the young Nara's voice, and even Chaoji's eyes had widened slightly. To them, Naruto had always been a ball of energy who couldn't possibly stay in his seat, wearing a garish orange suit that would make him a target from miles away. That extra energy seemed to have disappeared, and the absence of orange only made their friend and academy classmate more serious. He even seemed to have grown a few inches, and his body seemed to have lost some fat. It looks better without so much orange, Ino admitted, sending a pointed look Sakura's way. Don't you think, forehead? TCH. Even if he was 2 meters tall, that idiot wouldn't look good, Ino pig. Naruto and Sasuke's gazes met. The Uchiha tensed slightly as those darkened blue eyes met his gaze, lacking the intense glow that had characterized them, now a colder, less intense, but more dangerous glow. Naruto, man. The Inyazuka broke the tension between Sasuke and Naruto. He had started walking towards the blonde, showing a savage smile. And that change. Do you want to surprise the girls? The firm posture disappeared as Naruto's shoulders slumped and his smile reappeared. I just thought they wouldn't spot me too soon, Kiba. With all that orange, I was like a fat, live target. Now I can blend in with the darkness of a forest. Ha! That's something to see. Who are your new classmates? Is what Sakura told us true? Naruto kept his eyes on Sakura for a few moments, who looked away and looked back at Shikamaru, who had asked the question. About breaking her arm? She tried to hit me and I was just defending myself, he replied with a shrug. And these are my teammates. Ryu Uzumaki and Akeno Uchiha. We form the Reform Squad 11, or Team 11. He briefly looked directly into Kabuto Yakushi's curious eyes before focusing them back on Shikamaru, who was looking at him in surprise. The third saw fit to reassign me to a team with a better instructor and teammates who wouldn't try to restrain me, as well as constantly attack me, as was often the case with them. Haven't you given up on your dream? No. Did you think I would? Honestly? No. You're too stubborn to just give up and give up, Naruto. To believe you'd give up on your dream when you were so insistent as to fight Sasuke 100 times in Jujutsu trials would be unwise of me. Shikamaru could be considered one of the few who knew Naruto or a large part of his mentality and ideas, even if he had changed teams, partners and instructor. Naruto had wanted to be Hokage since they were children, probably since some encounter with the third Hokage. The chances of him abandoning a dream he clung to as a child were very slim for Shikamaru due to many factors. Hahaha. You could certainly have analyzed me, or at least you'd be the only one who didn't believe I'd give up on something like being Hokage, the blonde Uzumaki admitted. That shows how much you know me. I think we've attracted a lot of attention. The purple had slowly disappeared, revealing strands as black as crow feathers. Akeno approached the two boys, dragging Ryu, who had started kicking again, behind her. I see, Naruto looked around the room at each participating team. I think they've fallen in love with me. That's why they're staring at us so intently. He smiled in a fluid, mocking way. Some people would probably die in those exams, he had assumed, but that didn't make it any less intense. Chapter 7. The first part of the Chunin exams consisted of a written exam that the evaluators placed on each participant's desk before taking up positions on either side of the room, beginning to watch the participants with their critical eyes, scrutinizing their every move. At the head of the examiners, with a serious face and scars crossing it, his dark eyes observing the participants, was Ibiki Morino, a Takubetsu Jonin expert in torture, being the head of the torture and interrogation department of Konoha, and known to be an expert in this field, even more so than some members of the Yamanaka clan. Ibiki Morino was known throughout Konoha for his seriousness. He was a man closer to the raw side of any shinobi village, focused on extracting information from the prisoners he came across. It wasn't a job a mentally unstable person could handle, and Ibiki played the role of an experienced torturer very well. He cared little for his victims' well-being, nor did he pay any attention to the cries and screams of his prisoners as he tortured them with his specialized torture jutsu. To the naked eye, Ibiki couldn't be considered human, as he barely seemed to have any feelings, and his dark eyes and stern face showed no emotion, except on certain very special occasions. This man, by order of the third Hokage, had taken command of the first test of the Chunin exams and was the main evaluator of the participants of that stage, as well as the one in charge of choosing the secondary examiners who would support him in evaluating said participants, discarding all those who made a mistake, no matter how small. Because that exam hid a secret. The first test was known as the written test and was a 10-question exam, with the 10th question being so important that it could cause an entire team to fail if there was even a single mistake. But that wasn't the secret, of course. The exam had been packed with 9 questions above the genin level, and each mistake on a question subtracted 1 point from the 10 participants received for taking the exam, affecting the entire team. The 10th question was different from the others. After the exam began, 45 minutes later, participants would be given the option to answer the question or not. If they failed the question and agreed to answer, the entire team would be expelled. But the purpose was not to answer a few simple questions. The questions from 1 to 9 were typical of exams higher than those of genin, possibly even higher than those of ichnin, which made it impossible for the participants to pass that exam just by answering. And therein lay the secret of the exam. Ichnin was a team leader, someone capable of obtaining information without being discovered and, in turn, protecting their teammates, as well as having trust in them. And that was what the first test was about. Obtaining the information for that exam by cheating without being discovered by the examiners or other participants, although if one looked closely, the genin's movements were not completely polished, although the examiners had to judge whether or not they were fit for the next test. Numbers 56, 58, and 57. You're out. The first genin team had been eliminated 5 minutes into the test, and the pen ripping paused momentarily before resuming the tearing. Chairs moved, scraping the floor, and the aforementioned genin left the classroom, swearing under their breath, angry at having failed, though they were actually too slow to cheat. Contestants must be careful and take answers from others. 2 genin are infiltrated among them, with the answers already worked out on their sheets. In addition, 2 examiners have the answers worked out as well, and I have 2 sheets of the solutions on my table, waiting to be copied. Ibiki examined the participants, watching their subtle movements. Some parts of the ceiling had been removed and mirrors could be seen on some participants' desks. But others were cleverer, using their hit eye as mirrors and gleaning answers while communicating with their classmates elsewhere in the room. Ibiki hadn't forbidden them from communicating, of course, even though it was an obvious trap and the students had become clever at finding ways to communicate with their classmates and thus be able to answer the questions on their exams. Although there were some who didn't seem concerned. Ibiki's dark eyes swept over 4 Konoha genin. Kaido, from Team 7, and the 3 members of the new Team 11 who were under Anko's instruction. The 4 preteens were bored, staring at their exam paper without even writing their names on it, leaving the paper completely blank, which was extremely odd and made him squint. I understand why Kaido isn't worried. Counselor Shimura selected him to fill the gap in Team 7 left by the Uzumaki boy, the same one now under Anko's care. Although, did the third really trade Akeno for Kaido? Why has Shimura dispensed with the only female Uchiha he has ever kept under his care and guarded by his men? What game are you playing at, third Sama? Few of Konoha's shinobi knew anything about the history of Akeno Uchiha, the only female member of the clan still alive, likely thanks to some sort of divine intervention. Yet how could they have allowed Sasuke to be free from the yoke of the advisors and allowed Akeno to be taught under the watchful eye of Danzo Shimura? It was an incongruity and an injustice against the young woman and one of the most important clans in the village. Ibiki turned his thoughts back to the test, briefly catching the eye of the last Uchiha, as he was dubbed by the villagers, clan leaders, nobles, and the Hokage's advisors, likely attempting to obscure Akeno so she could be manipulated from the shadows by Danzo, which was quite the man's style. He was always a shifty, slippery type and liked to move behind the scenes, hidden from view, pulling strings from the shadows as if he didn't exist, completely out of the public eye. But the girl seems to be in perfect condition at first glance. Akeno had her arms crossed under her breasts, her eyes closed, and her face seemed completely serene, as if she were sleeping peacefully while the exam time passed. Could it be possible that she had fallen asleep? Ibiki narrowed his eyes as the possibility occurred to him, and for a moment he kept his eyes on the girl, trying to discern whether she was asleep or not by the way her facial muscles twitched, but he couldn't tell if she had fallen asleep. Her face was completely unperturbed. 46, 48, and 78. You and your classmates are expelled. 2 more teams were expelled from the room after being caught cheating and copying during the test, indicating the lack of concentration and care these shinobi had when trying to obtain the questions for their exams. There are still a few minutes left before I give you the 10th question. Ibiki looked at the clock above the classroom entrance. He had mentioned at the start of the test that after 45 minutes, he would give them the final question, giving them time to mentally prepare for it. He had already made a note of all those who might give up when he announced the final question, which would lead them to abandon the exam without even looking back, and the winnowing would be complete for the second test. According to the third Hokage's estimates, only 10 genin would make it to the finals of the Chunin exams, which would lead to a tournament between them to determine the winner. Although, of course, the third test hid something, just as the first test did, well, the second test was a much tighter sieve to narrow down the participants and arrive at a suitable number for the third test. It's time. Ibiki placed his arms behind his back and the examiners stationed on either side of room 301 stopped their quills and positioned themselves in the same position as the scarred man. With darkened eyes, Ibiki scanned the participants, looking for the weakest among the genin present. Hold your pens and let go. All the genin stopped their pens, dropping them on their desks as the examiner glared at them all. It's time for the 10th question. But first, you must choose whether to answer it or not. Why? Akusa genin recklessly asked the question. Why do we have to choose when we can already pass or fail? It doesn't make sense. His lips curled and Ibiki showed a malicious mocking smile. Really? If you fail this question your entire team will be expelled from this exam. Fear, confusion and incomprehension filled the participants after those words. Akeno opened her eyes. Ryu stopped playing with his exam paper and fixed his one eye on the dark-skinned man. Naruto raised his head, his eyes sleepy, and looked at the man with some confusion. Other participants began to get nervous, looking at each other and their classmates. Are you going to answer, Whiskers? Naruto blinked before looking over to where Akeno was sitting. The Uchiha had crossed her arms under her chest again and closed her eyes, but she wasn't asleep. The rising and falling of her torso indicated that she was still awake, probably waiting for him to answer her question. But he looked over at Ryu, who was also looking at him, that indigo eye fixed on him intensely. Of course. Let's keep going, right? I'm not going to back down, and we promised Anko-sensei we'd make it to the finals. HMP. Then we shouldn't worry. We're continuing to work toward the next phase and we'll answer this man's question. So we'll keep waiting. Exactly. Ryu believes that by keeping quiet, we'll move forward. There's no need to worry, Naruto-senpai, Akeno-senpai. Ryu knows we'll make it to the finals. Several genin began to rise, standing up, leaving the classroom under the watchful eyes of the evaluators and the head examiner, who watched the team's backs as they left the room, filled with confusion and discomfort, dejected to find the obstacle in their path that had stopped them. But others stayed, waiting for the 10th question. Ibiki looked at the genin who had remained, briefly glancing at Kabuto Yakushi, before looking at the evaluators stationed on either side of the room before nodding, turning back to the participants. It seems the participants are better this year than last, he said, without revealing the final question. This exam, he tapped the sheet on his desk, gives us insight into your intelligence gathering skills as spies. Staying in the classroom only demonstrates your trust in your classmates. It wasn't necessary to take this exam because you already had a 10 right from the start. But it seems few of you present have seen what's hidden behind this test. I actually fell asleep. Naruto had whispered to Ryu, who nodded vehemently, understanding his companion's words. He too had briefly fallen asleep, although playing with the test seemed much more entertaining. For her part, Akeno's cheeks had turned pink. She too had fallen asleep, though she wasn't going to share that information with her two companions or anyone else. You passed this exam. Crack. The window shattered into hundreds of glass fragments, and a banner was waving inside the classroom, with some intensity where the name of the examiner could be seen, although in this case it was a female examiner. The incredible Anko Mitarashi, second examiner, and the woman was already standing in front of her banner, with her mocking and malicious smile present on her face. It seems you've softened this year, Ibiki. It's just that this year they seem to be better participants than the last few editions of the exam in Konoha. Anko didn't doubt Ibiki's words too much. Her own team was among the participants, so she could see the level of the genin present. I'll take care of reducing them to more than half, don't worry. I think you're getting old. Anko took a step forward. Listen to me, genins. It's time for you to go to training camp 44. I'll expect you in an hour. And the woman disappeared. Well, Akeno stood up, followed by Naruto and Ryu, and watched by Kaido. We have sensei's expectations for us. We'd better get there and do a good second test. Chapter 8. Training Camp 44 was better known as the Forest of Death. It was a dense forest, with trees with thick trunks and leafy branches that almost prevented sunlight from reaching the ground, hindering the growth of many plants, forcing them to grow more than normal in order to survive in that place. But it was not known as the Forest of Death for its strange vegetation, among which were various poisonous plants and strange carnivorous plants that could devour a person, but for the enormous animals that moved through the vegetation, showing themselves to be as large as the summons of some shinobi and being capable of easily killing an adult person. So any genin could easily find death if they got lost in the forest, and it was enough to put fear in the bodies of the participants of the second test. Normally, the number of participants in the Chunin exams wasn't that high by the time the second test arrived, but this year there were more promising genin than usual. The Itagakure team was still completely intact. The Seoul Kumo team and the Iwa team had prevailed in the test. And the Konoha rookies were all in the second test with their respective teammates, eager to find out how they would be examined in that test, which would most likely be a battle of survival. The participants had to be reduced to more than half, and the Forest of Death was the ideal area to proceed with the elimination of many of the competitors, even if it meant death. The youngest participants, as well as Konoha's rookies, stared in awe at the Forest of Death. Enormous fences remained up, surrounding Training Camp 44, keeping onlookers away from any danger, and the forest beasts locked inside, with little chance of escaping. No animal was known, at least not at the moment, to have escaped from the Forest of Death, though it wasn't a completely non-existent possibility. There was a chance of that happening, and of a disaster occurring, something the higher-ups didn't want to happen, especially if it involved the heir of a prominent clan or a wealthy businessman. You seem surprised. It is said, brat, that the Forest of Death was created with the Mokuton of the first Hokage. Hashirama Senju, the strongest of the existing shinobi. Although I have my doubts. The Bijuu's thick voice echoed in the blonde Uzumaki's mind, causing him to frown and contort his face. The nine-tailed demon fox had remained completely silent in those 15 days since his separation from his former team, and he wasn't used to having someone other than his own voice ringing inside his head, although there was nothing he could do to remedy that. He kept his face completely impassive, or as much as he could, and looked towards the Forest of Death, sensing several chakra signatures within that dense place, although much smaller than those of a human, although larger than those of an average-sized animal. It's possible that those signatures are those of the gigantic animals Anko-sensei told us about, the ones that could devour us. According to her, there are centipedes of enormous size, like 100 people stretched out in a straight line. But could that really be the case? The genin checked his gear. He'd packed several ninja cables, some emergency rations, and bandages into his bag, slightly necessary items for a camping trip. He'd also stocked up on shuriken and kunai to replace the ones he'd used, swapping out the old ones for new ones of better quality than the ones he had up until that point. Finally, the examiner for the second test appeared, standing on a platform, calling the attention of the test participants. Anko's eyes moved, watching the genin as they fell silent. Slowly, the whispers faded until the last genin stopped speaking, turning their attention to Anko. The woman cleared her throat and nodded to her assistants, who began to go through the participants, handing out consent forms. Welcome to the second test. My teammates are handing out a consent form where you completely release the village from your death. That last word made the genin shudder, especially those less experienced in life or death situations. With that small gesture, Anko immediately deduced who might abandon the test before it began and felt slightly proud when her team showed no signs of nervousness or fear. In this test, you will spend 5 days inside the Forest of Death with your team. Each participating team will be given a scroll, either from heaven or earth. In order to advance to the third phase, you will have to go to the tower in the center of the forest with both scrolls, so obtaining them will fall squarely on you. How you obtain them is up to you. Is that clear, brats? Now is when you must choose whether to continue forward or turn back and give up. The genin began talking among themselves in soft whispers and worried glances. Anko had overemphasized the possibility of death if one entered the Forest of Death, which had generated genuine concern among the participants. Dying for participating in an exam. The young men looked at each other, worried and doubtful, clearly reluctant to sign the form they had been given. They seemed to accept the idea of giving up at that point and being able to take the exam when they had more experience. Here, Anko-sensei. Naruto, Akeno, and Ryu handed the forms to the woman, who nodded, feeling even more proud of the 3 boys. She had expected to see doubt in their eyes, but none of the 3 seemed willing to back down or dissatisfied with the situation and location of the second test, even though they really could die. But the 3 remained calm and walked toward the area designated for those who had decided to attend the second test. And they were the first to accept the terms of that exam. Wait. That little brat and his classmates decided to take the test. The boy from the Kumo team rudely pointed at Naruto with his index finger, probably surprised by the fact that a child shorter than 5 feet tall was willing to face the Forest of Death, something that seemed to be an insult towards him by the way he shouted and pointed at him. It's not my fault you're short on balls, hey, let's go. You look better when you're quiet. Akeno grabbed Naruto by the collar of his shirt and dragged him behind her, while the boy stuck his tongue out at the Kumagakure native. You should stop attracting attention, Whiskers. We've had enough with Ryu without you also looking for trouble with teams that can go after our heads. Ryu didn't do anything. He's a good boy. Akeno shot a sharp look at the Redeed, whom she was dragging like Naruto, grabbing him by the back of the collar of his shirt, although in this case it was the vest that covered his shirt. You're like children. That's not true. Only to a certain extent, Akeno-senpai. Have those three really agreed to go to that forest? The boy, with dark skin and pale blonde hair, looked at his two companions, trying to find an explanation. The three most idiotic genin in Konoha seemed to be the most reckless when it came to a fight to the death, and in a way, it had annoyed and resented him. Where did that put them if three inexperienced genin idiots accepted the test and they didn't? Stop overthinking it, one of the Kumo girls spoke with some force. Her skin was slightly darker than her companions. Two amber eyes watched a boy's movements as he moved the lollipop around in his mouth. Her hair, unlike that of her two companions, was red, spiky, and fell to the middle of her back. Sign it already, and you can kick those idiots' asses. What do you think, Samui? The last member, a woman with pale, almost lime-white skin and blonde hair darker than the boys, blinked when she heard her name coming out of her companion's mouth. Her gray eyes had been staring at Naruto for a few moments as he was pulled away by the Uchiha. We should take a chance. Anyway, we're not genin as such. Both the boy and the red-haired girl looked at each other before looking back at Samui. She was the team leader, and they were, in fact, known as Team Samui, led by their two instructors. They were sent to Konoha for the exams, albeit with a different objective that differed greatly from the exam itself, something the examiners and village leaders weren't supposed to know about. Fine, fine. The boy raised his hands, surrendering. Let's sign and kick that team of idiots' asses and get some revenge for some shorty trying to look cool in front of. Here, Samui. This is my sheet and the idiot's. I signed it for him. I know his signature. Hey. While Team Samui was arguing, Akeno had taken her two teammates as far away from the rest of the participants as possible and thrown them with some force against the ground, earning a groan from both Uzumaki as they fell to the ground. She crossed her arms, placing them under her chest, and stamped the heel of her left foot on the ground, keeping her dark eyes on both boys. It's time for you to focus. Both of you. Ryu had started looking at a butterfly and looked relaxed, but at Akeno's dark tone, the red-haired Uzumaki turned his head towards the girl, staring at her with his eyes. Anko-sensei already explained to us in advance what the test entails. Each team will have either a heaven or earth scroll, and they must match the two to pass. Once they give us the scroll and open the gates, we have 5 days to complete the test and go to the tower with both scrolls. But with your performances, I think several teams will be chasing us. Ryu's striking entrance and the friction between the Kumo boy and Naruto had given Team 11 several potential rivals who would target them. Their childish and unprofessional attitude toward the other participants had made them appear weak and inept shinobi who could be hunted and wouldn't cause much trouble. Although that was only in the eyes of the other participants, especially those older and more experienced. Anyone present at the exam would choose any of the weakest-looking genin as their opponent, even though that would be a mistake for them. The second test involved surviving in a dangerous environment with hundreds of hazards surrounding the teams, and it wasn't just about obtaining scrolls. Now we must decide who should deliver the scroll. Since you're idiots and have attracted attention, it's best if I carry the scroll. Ryu is offended by that sentence, Akeno-senpai. I don't care how offended you are. I'll take it, and whoever disagrees. Akeno clenched her fist. Her eyes blazed with intensity and fire. I think she's right. She'll protect the scroll well, won't she, Ryu? Ryu was nodding his head so hard that Naruto thought it would end up falling off, or that his neck would end up giving way with some horrible cracking sound, but neither happened, and the Redeed continued nodding his head without any concern. Eyes. You've wandered too far away. With slow steps, Anko approached her students with a crooked smile. In her hand, she held a scroll. The rest of the scrolls had already been distributed to the other teams, who signed the sheet, waiving any repercussions to the village for her death. There had been more than she had expected, but that only made the test more interesting, because they were odd-numbered teams. One would be left without a scroll if luck favored the participants, and all the teams obtained those scrolls. Sensei. The woman threw the scroll directly at the Uchiha. Swiftly, the Kunoichi's hand caught the scroll, and she glanced at it briefly before putting it away. While you're here, this will be your starting gate. The three of them looked toward the door. It was large, rusty, and clearly hadn't been used for years. Get the other scroll within the time limit and take it to the tower. I have faith you'll succeed. Chapter 9. The light was scarce, and the little that managed to pass through the thick branches and leafy leaves of the trees was barely enough to illuminate the forest with a little natural light, which served so that the plants at ground level obtained the necessary nutrients to grow, but not to stand out like the enormous trees that made up the forest. Although it was said that these trees were generated by the Mokutan of the first Hokage, a man who had written his own legend and had given meaning to the formation of Konoha by building the Will of Fire, which took root in all the hearts of the inhabitants of the village, although many shinobi disagreed. The dark, lightless environment had not been an impediment to the animal fauna growing within the confines of the Forest of Death, although with sizes too different from the animals that lived outside the forest. As if they had suffered some mutation, Team 11, upon entering, saw an enormous centipede climbing one of the thick trees, its legs constantly hitting the wood and causing a constant annoying tapping, almost as if they were pecking the wood incessantly until they created some hole in it. The sound did not disappear, it was only replaced by another that could become a chill for visitors to the forest, as Naruto deduced when he felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand up from a shiver that hit him involuntarily. Although the second trial consisted of gathering the 2 scrolls and bringing them to the tower within 5 days, which would be a test of survival, it was also about finding the courage to face unknown things. Shinobi might learn facts, routines, and some important things from their missions, but what happened when a mission wasn't what it initially seemed? The Forest of Death served to toughen the genin who wanted to become Chunin, tempering their spirits and minds until they became leaders willing to move through unfamiliar terrain with even more unknown dangers. Why didn't anyone know what the forest hid? It was always fenced, with guards at each entrance preventing unauthorized entry, and only groups were allowed inside, which could be why genin were introduced with their teams, and solo participation was rarely allowed. Although no one was ever denied entry for participating solo, it did make it much more difficult to reach the tower if you didn't have certain skills and instincts that a genin shouldn't have. And only 2 cases were known in the history of Konoha. After a couple of hours, Team 11 finally stopped, completely surrounded by thick dense bushes that covered them and enormous branches that protected them from above, serving as a natural hiding place and being hidden from prying eyes that could be watching them, something that would not work against a Byakugan or a sensor ninja, who could quickly find them, no matter how hard they tried to hide from their enemies. But they could not continue advancing without a plan in mind or a course of action. Before continuing, they had to recognize the strongest among their possible rivals and create a plan to avoid them in case they encountered them. They had to survive. There aren't many teams that gave me a bad feeling when I saw them in classroom 301, the blonde muttered, crouching next to his 2 classmates. Although, if he was honest, few of the genin in the classroom had ever made him shudder to the extent of what he felt with Zabuza in the Land of Waves. Team Suna is dangerous, and its members are no ordinary genin. Bara, Kankuro, and Tamari. Naruto remembered the 3 of them perfectly. They were the same boys who had collided with Konohamaru, and the guy in the black jumpsuit was the one who had almost beaten him up until he showed up. But he had to thank his former Uchiha teammate for the first time. All of Team Suna's attention shifted from him and Konohamaru to Sasuke when he pointed at the reed on a tree branch. That boy with a strange gourd gave him a chill he still remembered all too well, almost as if it had taken up residence inside him and he couldn't easily shake the unpleasant sensation. Rather, it's a feeling you recognize. Naruto took a deep breath and pushed the fox's words into his deepest recesses, hiding them behind blocks of much more positive and pleasant thoughts until he completely forgot about them. Although they would always be there, and he knew it. They also gave me a certain fear. Though I don't know if it's really fear, Akeno admitted, shaking her head, not understanding what she'd felt. But Kabuto Yakushi is also dangerous. Has he repeated the exam so many times? Him? I'm surprised, and he had information on all the participants, almost as if he knew them. How did he obtain that information when it's hidden within each village's archives? We can't even access our own files or data unless the third approves it with a seal. Akeno's words weren't a lie. The files and information on every shinobi and kinmochi in a village were tightly guarded within the archives, protected from prying eyes and potential enemies of the village. So how had Kabuto been able to steal the information from the exam participants? Not even an Anbu was skilled enough to break into the archives, and only those with the right skills could do so without being caught or leaving any evidence of their intrusion. This made Kabuto a dangerous enemy, much more so than Team Suna or the Kumagakure boys. As much as Sasuke believed he was going to become a Chunin and that he was a prodigy, Kabuto was too dangerous to have around, even if he was from the same village. Perhaps he was a hidden examiner? No. If that were the case, Anko-sensei would have told us about it, and she doesn't even seem to know about Kabuto's existence beyond his role as the village's genin. And if he's not an examiner, then what is he? Naruto wasn't unaware of how dangerous his thoughts sounded, even if he didn't verbalize them. If Kabuto was so talented and wasn't an examiner, it meant he was hiding his potential and was a potential enemy, despite bearing the same symbol as him, Akeno and Ryu, making him a spy, an infiltrator within Konoha. Because he refused to see him as a comrade, not until he understood why he was hiding his potential from the third and the high command. We should be careful with him and his team, the blonde nodded, looking into his partner's dark eyes. If he's hiding who he really is, even from the third, it means he could be a traitor to the village and participating in this exam for a specific reason. Although, what could he possibly want? An attack on the village? Or information about Konoha shinobi? Something like information isn't so important to take on a test where it could be discovered. What are you all waiting to see on the test? Naruto and Akeno looked at Ryu. The cordial tone and the jokes, as well as the prefixes, disappeared for a moment, with his eye shining brightly before disappearing, as if it had been a blink of his intelligence. That. Naruto-senpai and Akeno-senpai will find out. Ryu is sure of it. There's Ryu again. I thought he hit his head, the blonde muttered, laughing dryly, but the words he said led me to something. Akeno frowned and looked questioningly at her companion, not understanding what he was thinking. And that's. Before you appeared, there had only been one Uchiha in recent years, known as the last Uchiha, an attraction for feudal lords, businessmen, and politicians who would surely fill the stands at the third test, eager to see what the last member of the prestigious clan is capable of. But now there are two Uchiha, and yet the attraction to Sasuke is greater than the one to you. And this could attract kidnappers or murderers to the village. Do you think Kabuto is after Sasuke? Maybe so, though I don't rule out the possibility that he's after you as well. Akeno felt a brief shiver, but didn't show it. In this world, a woman from a clan is a bargaining chip that many villages would love to have in their ranks. To create armies, eh? At the implication of that thought, Akeno felt like vomiting and briefly closed her eyes. Her life had never been happy. Her family was murdered, and she was sent into the hands of Counselor Shimura, who hid her away for the next few years. She wasn't able to make friends her own age until she met Ryu, and even then, she felt Danzo's eyes always on her, as if breathing her out. They would use me too to recreate the Uchiha. Don't overthink it, Naruto urged, bringing her back to reality by placing his hand on her shoulder in a gentle gesture. Now we must focus on the exam, and we'll avoid Kabuto and the Suna gang. Though I won't avoid the fight if they come after you. The warm feeling surged within her, and for a second, her eyes were all on Naruto. She tried to say something, maybe a thank you, but her lips wouldn't part, and when they did, Naruto had pushed her back harder than she expected. 5. Team 11's eyes remained fixed on the cloud of dust surrounding the place where they had been hiding. Gradually, this dust became much less dense, allowing them to observe their attacker. He was a thin, slender young man, with skin as pale as lime and white hair falling to his shoulders. His eyes, an intense blue hue, seemed to be a huge pit devouring everything in its path. He wasn't wearing Hitai 8. At Akeno's scream, Naruto and Ryu tried to look at the albino boy's forehead, but he just vanished from where he had been, leaving only the crater he had made when he fell as a trace. Perhaps he fled when he saw himself outnumbered. No, that's nonsense. Those eyes, they're like Zabuza Momochi's before he died. But what? We shouldn't dwell on this any longer than necessary. Naruto stood up, followed by Ryu. Our position has been compromised. The crash and your scream may have attracted the attention of others. There it is. I told you I recognized a girl's scream. It's the only thing you always recognize, Amway. Team 11 turned their attention to the three Kumo-genin. Two girls and a boy, the latter with a sword sheathed on his back, a common trait within the Kumagakure shinobi ranks. The Land of Lightning was known for its shinobi dedicated to Kenjutsu, an art that shinobi didn't usually practice, and few specialized in that branch. It didn't take long for the boy, Amway, to draw his sword and leap, propelled by chakra, towards Naruto, swinging the sword in a perfect arc that sliced through the air and attempted to sever his target's neck. Plank. Samui and Carrie's expressions were genuinely surprised. Both of them, including Amway, had expected the blonde genin to flee from the attack or even die due to his inability to react to the speed. But Naruto had reacted and protected himself by using a kunai to block the Kumo-genin's slash, a gesture that put his two companions on guard. What scroll do you have? The blonde Uzumaki asked, his eyes never leaving Amway's. We have the Earth One. Amway's eyebrows moved upward, but he didn't respond or slow down his attack. In fact, the swordsman increased his strength, which was superior due to the height difference, causing Naruto to jump back and skid, leaving him between Ryu and Akeno. We are Earth 2, Samui showed the scroll that proved she wasn't lying, which made Akeno show the one she was carrying in her slide. I see you haven't lied. We both have Earth. Then there's no need to fight, the Uchiha said, putting the scroll away again. We don't need your scroll, and even if we were to fight to obtain it for some trade, it would probably wear us down. Samui nodded and followed Carrie to the ground. That's true. There's no need. Oh, come on. Amway pointed at Naruto. I want to kick his ass for telling me I don't have. The blonde Kunoichi's cold eyes stopped Amway's words, which turned into a growl. If what your partner wants is a fight, Akeno pushed Naruto towards Amway, we should be nice and let the silly kids fight. Understand? I admit it would be interesting, Carrie nodded at Samui's words, and finally, the blonde agreed. I think that will stop Amoy from crying for the rest of the exam. Naruto will also be much less energetic and more manageable, Akeno admitted, earning an offended look from her blonde companion. Is it necessary to bet the scroll? No, unless you want to. How about 1,000 Ryo? That makes it okay for me, Carrie agreed. In total, the winner takes home 2,000. I think we're like monkeys at a fair. You correct. Naruto and Amoy sighed, but positioned themselves. The next second, they were facing each other. Chapter 10. Small flashes and the incessant clash of metal against metal began to fill a small clearing in the Forest of Death, the same clearing where Team 11 and Team Samui had met after the strange young man disappeared. Now, two boys moved quickly, clashing their weapons fluidly, without error, seeking to injure their rival and finally stop the fight. But it wasn't easy to overcome the defense of a more trained taller shinobi with more experience in real combat, something Naruto realized when he faced Amoy for the fourth or fifth time. The boy from Kumo was just over 5'6", making Amoy almost 8 inches taller than Naruto himself, and he also had a more developed body. From the fights, his reflexes seemed to be superior or much more fluid than his own, indicating that he had been in many more fights than him, which translated into much more experience, much more skill and reaction time. So how could he beat someone who was superior in almost every aspect he could think of? Naruto saw no weaknesses in Amoy's kenjutsu stance, and the speed of his slashes was increasing and much more force with each blow, almost causing him to fall to the side when the boy hit him hard. He had felt the steel cut the skin of his arm. That stronger blow made Naruto jump back, throwing a shower of shuriken at Amoy, which the older boy deflected using his sword, and, sending chakra to his legs, threw himself behind the Uzumaki sending a stab with his sword, using both hands to push his weapon. Poof. Amoy's eyes opened, but it was too late. The clone vanished in a thick white cloud that covered his face completely and entered his eyes, making him blink at the intense stinging he felt due to the cloud, which clouded his vision and made him depend on his other senses. This kid is smarter than he looks. He was slightly blind, but his ears picked up the movement of the projectiles flying at him. The training, the constant intense classes, did everything for him. He swung his sword and deflected the projectiles, which ended up embedded either in the ground or in some tree, and he opened his eyes again, blinking, seeing an army of clones in front of him. He has ridiculous chakra reserves to do that. Naruto's intelligence had left much to be desired within the academy, and his physical appearance hadn't yet been worked on as intensely as Rock Lee's or Amoy's, who seemed stronger than him, although they weren't that close. But what he did have, what made him special, was his sharp mind for a confrontation, as he had done when he fought Mizuki or Haku, although on the latter occasion he received special help from his tenant. But that did not take away his sharpness. At a signal, the clones rushed at Amoy like a huge torrent of blonde-haired dark-clad youths, completely blocking the Kumo Genin's view. Cloud style. Crescent moon cut. He took a deep breath. He gripped the sword's handle tightly, still feeling his palms sweating from the sheer number of clones, but that didn't despair him. When he opened his eyes and let out the air he'd been holding in his throat, Amoy swung his sword and slashed at a huge number of Naruto's clones, turning them into clouds of white smoke that continued to obscure his vision. He wants to make me blind. Amoy quickly understood Naruto's plan. He was using the clones as a window over his eyes, covering his vision, and when they were destroyed, it was the clouds of smoke that kept him unaware of what was happening behind the tide of clones and prevented him from seeing what the original was doing. If they're rushing so desperately, it means the boy is behind all these clones. The seals followed one another quickly, almost invisibly, and when Amoy's hand closed again on the handle of his sword, now with more force, electricity ran through the blade with intensity, creating a bluish coating that covered the steel and constantly released small rays towards the sky. Let's go. Amoy swung his sword swiftly and fluidly. The lightning intensified, and an electric slash cut the next batch of clones in half, turning them into white smoke that vanished with the next swing of his sword, which sliced through the next contingent like butter. Underfield. The sword slammed into the ground, causing it to split and crack, and lightning bolts shot out, shattering the clearing and causing the trees to shake, a couple of them cracking and falling from the jutsu released by the genin. But what? In groups, the clones disappeared, devoured by the lightning and bursting into clouds of smoke, being eliminated little by little, until only one Naruto remained standing, being struck by the lightning and sent crashing into the tree behind him. Gotcha, shorty. Poof. That. Amoy's eyes widened as the Naruto he believed to be the original burst into a puff of smoke shortly after moving his lips into a mocking smile, leaving him completely alone in the clearing, standing on a shattered ground, sword in hand, but no longer with the electricity running through it. There was no trace of their enemy, and no clone seemed to be in sight. So where was the Konoha genin? He had summoned at least 100 clones, only to disappear. Following that line of thought, she turned her attention to her companions and the other two Konoha genin, who were standing next to Samui and Kori, watching the fight. So he's still here. Gripping the sword tightly, Amoy returned his focus to the fight, hoping to see some movement, something that would make him see where Naruto was, but the blades were the only thing moving, searching for a way to remain still again after the tremor caused by his attack. Where? Crack. Rubble briefly covered Amoy's vision, but what surprised him wasn't the rubble or the cry of surprise from his companions. It was Naruto Uzumaki bursting out of the ground, swinging his leg and hitting him in the face with such force that he was thrown backward and had to regain his balance, now with his nose shattered and blood dripping from his nostrils. NGH. Grasping the nasal septum, he repositioned it with a slight crunch and intense pain. He had thought it was broken, but the blow had only bent it. Did you think you could beat me? The dirt had soiled Naruto's dark clothes, and blood dripped from his fists. Amoy noticed the raw knuckles and shredded nails. I thought so, to be honest. He waved the sword, coating it with his lightning release again, but you seem to be worse than a cockroach, and you just won't give up. You can consider me a flying cockroach, those are much scarier. Amoy and Naruto met halfway, clashing weapons once again. But this time, the Kumo boy wasn't holding back and was using all the strength he had to push his enemy back, something Naruto deduced even before attacking him from the ground, so he shifted his weight to his left leg and moved, dropping Amoy to the ground. The Kumo genin's face would have touched the ground, and his skin would likely have been cut and stained with dirt if Naruto hadn't kneed him in the stomach, causing him to double over and spit blood onto the ground. No. Amoy blocked the next blow and jumped back, wiping the blood from his chin. I wasn't going to waste that, was I? The lips moved into a mocking and amused smile, a gesture that made the Kumo genin frown, but he showed no annoyance at the smile, at least outwardly. I would have done the same thing, he admitted, smiling intensely at the Konoha genin. You must take advantage of every blow you can land, because you won't be able to catch me off guard anymore. Slash. Naruto leaped to the right. The lightning strike split a tree in half, and with all its weight and force, it fell onto the shattered clearing, causing a massive cloud of dust, accompanied by debris and other fallen trees. That's dangerous, too dangerous. Let me help you, brat. Free me and I'll help you beat this insect. He cracked his neck and stretched out fully like a cat, proceeding to jump shortly after towards the fallen log, where Amoy was already waiting for him. I didn't expect you to have so much strength for a genin. And I didn't expect your mind to be so sharp, even at such a young age. But this makes it so much more exciting. I'll be able to beat you with the next one. Careful. Crack. The branches of the trees gave way easily, and some of them shook violently, as if the forest were experiencing some kind of earthquake. But there were no earthquakes, and only the trees were shaking intensely. Yellow, dangerous, two eyes moved in the dense darkness, and the jaws clamped shut as a giant body advanced forward, forcing Naruto and Amoy to jump out of the way. The giant snake. Samui's scream rang out over the crash of branches and trees being toppled. She and Carrie had followed the red-haired Uzumaki and moved out of the beast's way, leaving it free to escape its jaws. See Leva Akeno-senpai, Naruto-senpai. What do you say? At first, upon seeing the giant green-scaled snake, Naruto had thought it was some wild animal from the Forest of Death itself, although he quickly dismissed that, and his mind had moved to his teacher, but it was unlikely that she would intervene in the test, much less attack Akeno and take her away from the group. They weren't in a sensei-student test. If it's not a wild animal and Anko-sensei isn't involved, that means one can't fight calmly like this, Amoy complained, sheathing his sword. Since when do such large snakes exist? Those several meters of snake, if I may add. We'll leave the fight for another time, Amoy, Naruto growled, leaping toward one of the trees, following the snake's path. Ryu imitated him. See you. There goes my 2000 Ryo, Carrie sighed in defeat, her shoulders slumping. What do we do, Samui? Briefly, Samui's eyes glanced in the direction the two Team 11 boys and the enormous snake had taken. Moments later, she shook her head. She's not our companion, our village, or our goal. Let's move on to the second test. Harry and Samui vanished, but Amoy briefly glanced towards the place where the snake and its rival had left. In an instant, he too was gone. Chapter 11. It is not uncommon for some great ninjas and kunoichi to have non-human battle companions. The Inyazuka clan of Konoha trained the best ninkin in the village, and they were inseparable companions of their owners. Kakashi had counted on his companions, who were also dogs like those of the Inyazuka, to track his targets and pursue his enemies, something he used frequently. The difference in both cases was that Kakashi summoned the dogs, while the Inyazuka lived with them. Therefore, it was not strange for the elemental continent to have shinobi with summoning contracts, although in these cases, it was much more complicated than raising an animal for combat, since to obtain the summons they had to be recognized by the leader. Anko was known for her snake summoning, as well as her handling of poisons and torture, something her mentor had consistently instilled in her until it was etched in her mind. But the woman was on the perimeter, checking the fence and with various teams around the Forest of Death for the safety of the participants and ensuring there were no inconveniences during the test. And while she could have summoned a snake, what could her motive be? Snake summoners were rare on the elemental continent and tended to be somewhat strange, as Anko's attitude toward her students demonstrated. But the other snake summoner currently alive, who was Anko's teacher, was far stranger and crazier than his student, as well as far more dangerous than his own summons. Orochimaru, the white snake of Konoha, was a man with pale skin, long black hair, yellow eyes with slitted pupils like a snake, and a sharp elongated face. He was known for being a member of the Three Sannin, shinobi classified as S-rank by their villages, and one of the survivors of a fight against Hanzo of the Salamander, a strong ninja who fought in the Third Great Ninja War and who gave the Sannin his name. But it wasn't all strength. Orochimaru was intelligent, more so than his two teammates, and much more so than many people in the world, also being known for his strange experiments and his constant work with human beings, even when his teacher forbade him to do so, which is why he became a traitor to his village, a renegade ninja who enjoyed his experiments as he sought to achieve immortality and obtain all the jutsus in the world. And, within that twisted ambition, was the desire to obtain the Sharigan. Fukuku. The cold laugh sent a chill down Sakura's spine. She swallowed hard, feeling fear at those intense eyes staring at her, waiting for her to do something stupid, maybe waiting for her to stab him. She pressed her lips together and sank to her knees, defeated. Sasuke-kun. Uchiha's eyes opened and stared at the snake Sannin. The man had moved, unnoticed, until he was standing right in front of him, staring at him with his snake eyes. You should wait to think about something like death. The Sannin put the kunai away and threw it to the ground, laughing somewhat mockingly. I've waited too long for you to decide to leave your life in this place, turning those eyes away from me. No, it's not something I'm going to allow. Although I must admit, having an Uchiha gives me another chance in case I fail with you. The branches shook slightly, creaking as something larger passed by, and moments later the snake appeared. It slowly opened its jaws, and a dark object fell to the ground, completely covered in saliva. Ayakeno. It's surprising how Shimura hid the girl from me, but I don't understand why he's letting her run wild now. Has he gotten what he wanted? Kukuku. Coughing, Akeno Uchiha stood up with some difficulty, feeling her legs wanting to drop her. But she couldn't. She took a deep breath. She closed her hand around her katana and stood up straight, despite the murderous instinct of the pale man in front of her. Team 7, he muttered, looking at Sasuke and Sakura, though he saw no sign of their third member. What who? Let me explain. Akeno Orochimaru crossed his arms in front of his torso, watching as the girl tried to confront her instinct and not flee from that place. He had to say he was impressed by it and showed more willpower than Sasuke, even though Akeno was simply a tool and would probably be in charge of restoring the clan if he wasn't misled by Danzo's plans. I brought you for a simple reason. I want to give you something that can free you from those who still hold you. Orochimaru's words were like honey to Akeno's ears, which shuddered along with her own thoughts. The idea of losing the shackles that surrounded her, finally feeling the freedom she'd longed for since she was a child, was a promise she was willing to hold tight, even if it meant making a pact with the devil himself, with that man standing before her. If I accept what he says, rest assured, Danzo Shimura won't be able to follow you. All route will disappear and he won't be able to catch up with you where we're going, my dear. Whatever the third has promised you won't stop them, even if he's entered your mind. Kukuku, the tongue, longer than usual, moved like a snake's. To Akeno, it was disgusting, but what he was proposing was the freedom she desired. Sasuke-kun wants strength, and you want freedom. I will give you both what you desire, only if you accept me. You'll never be able to escape from me, Uchiha. Danzo's voice rang through her mind, louder than she could have expected. She briefly closed her eyes before pressing her lips together, feeling the advisor's hand hold her head down, her eyes fixed on the ground. Ah! That scream made her open them and look to her left. Kukuku. Sasuke had brought his hand to the left side of his neck, holding it tightly. The pain had brought him to his knees, his head bowed, strands of his hair obscuring his face. He was probably gesturing the pain with a twitching of his face, but it was impossible to see because of the thickness of his hair. The Sannin's bite looked dangerous. How is that going to give Sasuke more power? She wasn't an idiot who would trust Orochimaru, no matter how tempting his offer. Where was the fine print on what she was signing? What would she have to give the white snake to gain the freedom she longed for? She narrowed her eyes, feeling the change in Sasuke, how he seemed to convulse before finally collapsing onto the grass, probably from the pain. Then, Orochimaru's eyes fixed on her. It's your turn, Akeno-chan. Kukuku. You'll be addicted to this power. The kendo opened her eyes, but her body didn't react. After executing a specific finger position, Orochimaru's neck began to stretch, and he shot toward her. He was opening his mouth, and like a snake, he was baring his teeth. He was going to bite her. Pam. Crack. Hope wasn't a feeling Akeno had experienced throughout her childhood, always guarded by Danzo Shimura's men, and trained by those more experienced with the idea of using her as a weapon, perhaps as a bargaining chip. However, the warmth in her heart could only be due to that. The hope that her companion's back sent rushing through her with her appearance, striking the Sanin's head. Take your smelly teeth away from Akeno-senpai. Orochimaru gritted his teeth and wiped the blood from his cut lip. His eyes stared daggers into the Redeed's figure, and he proceeded to display a smile filled with mockery and venom. Ah. Prodigies. Although, a fox and a one-eyed man shouldn't be considered valuable in and of themselves. I wouldn't waste my time on two inferior and expendable beings, but Orochimaru's tongue was longer than usual, and Naruto grimaced at the sight, and the way he used it to lick himself is a specimen worth fighting for. Of course, I'll have no problem. The blood and the sensation of the cut overwhelmed him for a moment. At that moment, his eyes opened wide before glowing with danger. Fearlessly, he ran his thumb over the cut and licked the blood from the phalanx. You talk too much. Grabbing two more kunai, Naruto took a step forward. You're not going to have her. Oz. Sure. Naruto and Ryu were punched directly in their stomachs. In a split second, Orochimaru had traveled the mere 10 meters that separated him from the genin and rammed his fists into their stomachs, sending them tumbling backward against a thick tree trunk. You can't try to compare yourselves to me, the Sannin declared in his cold, mocking voice, filled with that poison that characterized him, that egocentric superiority with which an Uchiha could be considered. You are mere ants compared to a snake. Orochimaru was sure of his victory just as Akeno was sure of her death. But the difference between shinobi and ordinary people is that they did not take their words and promises to the extreme, which made first Ryu start to stand up, almost as if he had not been hit, and then Naruto, who wiped the blood from his chin with a quick movement of his hand. Ryu plans to kick the snake's ass, even if Ryu and Naruto-senpai are killed here. The blonde's lips twitched before stretching out into a foxy grin, his trademark. Oh. You took the words right out of my mouth. Fukuku, you're too bold. I'll have to teach you a lesson with your death. And again the Sannin disappeared from the sight of the preteens, but it didn't take long for him to show himself, slamming Naruto into the tree using his hand, applying the chakra-enhanced force, twisting his lips into a sinister, dark smile. Ah. Naruto-senpai. Ryu reacted too late, and the Sannin's leg sent him flying backward into another trunk. But the boy spun in the air and used his chakra to stick to the tree trunk. He raised his head, staring at the hand hitting his companion's stomach. With this, the fox won't be a problem, and without further ado, Orochimaru tossed Naruto into the bushes as if he were just trash, a throwaway piece of junk. Now, it's you. Threw him. Emerging from the ground, a geyser engulfed the snake Sannin, completely covering him. There were no fissures or gaps in the two walls of water that emerged, and Orochimaru merely looked at it with a raised eyebrow. Suiton. He ducked his head, guided by his instincts. Ryu's leg passed over him, generating a light wind that stirred his hair. Did he want to surprise him with that? He reached out and grabbed the Redeed's ankle. With a swift movement, he threw him against the very wall of water Ryu had created. You're so predictable, Kukuku. He launched himself forward, cutting through the water. The explosion surrounded him, and the dust and debris were a cover that covered his eyes and the sound of the explosions, his ears, leaving him without senses to see what surrounded him or who was waiting for him on the other side of that screen of dust. Kukuku. Ryu crashed to the ground and Orochimaru stepped on his head, burying it in the ground, his tongue sticking out mockingly from his mouth, as if in a sardonic smile. You thought you caught me? Kukuku. I'm a Sannin after all. But the atmosphere had changed. The sky darkened to the point that people believed night had already arrived. Thunder, lightning, and flashes of lightning crossed the sky and were heard loudly over the forest of death, accompanied by a howling, strong wind that shook the trees, despite the thickness of their trunks. Blinking, Orochimaru looked back at Ryu. If you're trying something, you're not going to. Thump. But it wasn't Ryu who attacked the white snake of Konoha, the traitorous Sannin. A figure wrapped in an electric blue cloak struck Orochimaru and slammed him into the tree trunk, the same one Naruto and Ryu were embedded in. Hey, bastard. Blue eyes appeared within that blue glow, now reddish blonde hair waving fiercely. Don't touch my teammates. Chapter 12. Sparks flew wildly across the sky, hitting the ground, the trees, and even the leaves. Some of them began to burn brightly after being struck by one of these sparks, and the blackened marks on the tree bark became more evident thanks to the intense blue light that shone in the clearing. The force of this light was such that Orochimaru was forced to close his eyes for several seconds. During this time, he received a powerful blow that sent him crashing through the tree he was being pushed against, sending him flying several meters back until he was able to turn and touch the ground with his feet, but he slid despite using chakra to stay in position. That had been unexpected. Taking a breath, he launched a powerful wind jutsu forward, which tore through bushes, branches and damaged the bark of several trees, but missed its target. His enemy disappeared from in front of him and reappeared behind him, moving his leg in a perfect half-moon movement that connected the genin's instep with the Sanin's neck and, with force, Naruto sent the older man to the right, several meters further, almost breaking his neck from the force used in the blow. Both Naruto and Orochimaru were surprised by this change in combat, although one showed it much more than the other and in a completely different way. While the genin was surprised by this extra strength that seemed to have filled his body in a time of need and was grateful, the Sanin was intrigued by this change, since the information he had on the Jinchuriki was completely different thanks to his informants, and it was assumed that he had gotten rid of the fox. Had the preteen undone the five-pointed seal by force of will? It could have been the only solution to the mystery, but Orochimaru instantly dismissed it. Not even a sealing master could undo a seal by force of will without using a different seal pattern. So what had happened? The Snake Sanin's thoughts were hampered by the flash of light and the fleeting movement of his opponent. He raised both arms, waiting for the blow, preparing to feel his enemy's fist strike deep within his stomach. But once again Naruto surprised the man. He reappeared behind him, striking his lower back and sending him flying forward several meters, forcing him to slide across the smoking ground. Lightly, the sparks had caused burns in the grass, and small threads of smoke rose towards the sky, getting lost among the leaves. Now, the dimmer light that enveloped the genin prevented these threads from being visible if one didn't pay much more attention, and the eyes of the two remaining genin of Team 11 were fixed only on their partner, who moved faster, more intensely, hitting Orochimaru through every gap he saw. Passing from one side to the other as if he were a thrown kunai that was bouncing between tree and tree. And that was just what Naruto did. Taking advantage of the increased speed, he had begun to bounce between the trees, placing the Sanin right in the center of the square, completely defenseless against his attacks, which became stronger because of the speed, although much more predictable than anyone could expect, since he followed a line in the attacks, the same path over and over again, and Naruto did not doubt that someone like Orochimaru could see his movements if he paid enough attention. Something he could not allow, and that forced him to move faster, more intensely, with more ferocity, with the clear intention of turning the man into a bleeding pulp. But the Sanin's reflexes were superior. The strength obtained sporadically, in a moment of need, did not surpass the experience and years of training and fierce confrontations that Orochimaru had. That is why his reflexes were better than those of a 13-year-old brat, of someone who had just graduated, whose best mission was to face a swordsman of the mist and had not even fought him hand to hand. He moved his head just as Naruto leaned against one of the trees, using his legs to launch himself up. This simple gesture prevented the genin from hitting him and crashing to the ground, leaving him slightly buried, his leg hooked to the ground, but with a light layer of sparks still surrounding his body. Something had changed in Naruto. Orochimaru looked at him analytically, hoping to see visible changes, and he saw them immediately, or rather, he saw them immediately. The previously blonde hair was flecked with streaks as red as blood itself, like the hair of that Uzumaki woman, and they stood out even more in the light from that layer of sparks that surrounded the preteen like a membrane protecting him from the outside world. Could it be a bastard version of the Raikage's lightning armor? At that thought, the Sanin narrowed his eyes and faced the Jinchuriki directly, curious about that outcome. Naruto had become an interesting part of him now, like a toy he didn't understand, and he longed to unravel all its mysteries so he could rest easy. Maybe he should mark him like he had Sasuke. No. Sasuke is special, even that girl is, but this brat. He cracked his neck and repositioned each bone. He could feel the wound still bleeding, which was surprising. Had he generated enough force to damage him, even superficially? Not even Sasuke had seriously damaged him with his fire jutsu, and the fox brat had only slightly damaged him. Lightning. He began to walk slowly, confident in himself, watching Naruto try to free his locked leg, the strength he exerted fading slowly, second by second. His aura had become dim and taken on a whitish, almost transparent color. Soon, those sparks would disappear as well, and the extraordinary strength would vanish as if it had never existed. I'm going to say that was surprising. The Sanin's shadow completely covered Naruto, who raised his head, looking defiantly at the man, but after all, you're useless like your parents. Did you really think you could survive a confrontation with me? You're pathetic. Orochimaru drew back his arm, ready to impale Naruto through the chest, an action he had done hundreds of times and would do again hundreds of times. But this time it was different. He swung his arm, ready to impale the boy, but a hissing sound made him pause briefly, and then he felt his flesh being cut, blood oozing from his fingertips. Bukuku blood trickled down the edge of the katana to the hilt, but Akeno's dark eyes didn't waver, standing there between Naruto and Orochimaru, the white snake of Konoha. Are you going to defend this boy, Akeno? And here I was feeling a certain affection for you, wanting to free you from all of them. This time, Akeno drew her katana and placed the tip under the man's chin, driving the tip right into the man's lower jaw, tearing his skin slightly, causing him to smile much more mockingly, much more sinister and amused than he usually did. Ah, it seems then that I will have to force the mark on you, don't you think? Crack. Orochimaru jumped back, feeling his skin prickle at the contact with the electricity, and fixed his eyes on the Uzumaki's glowing figure. Stay away from her, bastard, he hissed, gritting his teeth, or I swear I'll make a purse out of your pale skin. It's a chicken. Fear was a weapon used by the finest shinobi, by those who understood the human mind. But what happened when fear didn't work? Orochimaru was always confident of his victory over anyone who hadn't experienced a killer instinct like his, but it didn't affect those three genin, even when they would have to kill themselves to escape him. Were they that mentally strong? Were their wills so strong that they could face the fear he instilled in them? I'll have to modify my plans. Sasuke will test what the curse mark is, but I can't waste any more time with these brats or even sensei will appear in the area, ready to fight, and I still have to use Suna for the invasion, as a way to delay those people's plan. Damn it. Orochimaru relaxed his posture and laughed coldly, his eyes fixed on the three members of Team 11. No matter. I'll get you to accept the mark sooner than you think, lass. For now, I hope you enjoy this victory for yourselves, something to brag about. Although coming out of a fight with me alive is enough for that. For now, brats, this is a see you soon, because we'll see each other sooner than you think. The three boys couldn't even move. Orochimaru disappeared, vanishing in the blink of an eye, though the three of them couldn't even blink, they just stared at where the Sannin had been, waiting to see where he had gone, still with the feeling of being watched. But seconds later, that feeling faded, allowing the three of them to fall onto their butts, breathing heavily. They had faced one of the most powerful men in Konoha, even though he had become a traitor and an enemy to them. Few genin could claim to have survived a face-to-face encounter with a Sannin, especially if it was Orochimaru, the white snake of Konoha. What was that? Akeno's voice came out much louder than expected, and a faint blush appeared on her cheeks due to embarrassment for having raised her voice, but she didn't take her eyes off her companion and looked at him with much more determination. But despite feeling Akeno's eyes, Naruto couldn't answer her question. What had happened to him? A force had filled him the moment the five-pronged seal was placed over him, depriving him of the fox's voice and presence, as if it had split them in two and removed him from its claws, from its elongated shadow. I don't know, he admitted, shaking his head before looking down at his own hands. It's been magnificent, the best thing that's ever happened to me. He clenched his hands tightly. I guess I can be Sannin level when I want. The words were carried away by the wind, shortly before Akeno's laughter echoed through the forest of death, while Naruto looked at her with eyes like daggers. That's the best story you've ever told. He took his katana and sheathed it, standing up. Let's continue, guys. We must check on Team 7 and get the other scroll. We can't let Sensei down. Chapter 13. Being injured in the forest of death could become a death sentence for the person left injured, as this turned them into defenseless prey, someone easy to eliminate. And Team 7 found themselves in this situation. Sasuke Uchiha was unconscious, lying on a bed of leaves and small branches with a handkerchief over his face, partially covering it, leaving his skin damp and cool, in an attempt to mitigate the fever that seemed to have appeared because of the cursed mark. A couple of meters from the Uchiha, Kaido was lying against the wall of the natural cave, with his mask covering his face, making it impossible to see if he was asleep or unconscious, but the slight movement of his chest indicated that he was still alive, despite having been almost devoured by one of the Sannin snakes. Kneeling next to the Uchiha, Sakura kept an eye on the condition of her two companions with dark circles under her eyes, which looked a little worse due to fatigue. Her skin had become paler, her eyes lacked shine and her hair, despite being held by the Hittite, was disheveled and had leaves and small branches in it, which was complemented by the dirtiness of her clothes, probably from kneeling between her companions. Team 7 was not alone. On the other side of the natural cave, the members of Team 11 stood, standing apart from their teammates and watching the members of Team 7 with some caution, especially Sasuke. The boy had been marked by Orochimaru, and none of them knew exactly what the Sannin had done to his teammate and what exactly the mark he had placed on him did. Would it be some kind of enhancement, and that was why his body was assimilating it? Orochimaru had declared that his cursed mark would give Sasuke more power, attracting him to his side to become much stronger, but what exactly was the cursed mark? So far, Team 11 only knew of two people with the Snake Sannin's mark. The boy lying unconscious a few feet away from them and their own instructor, though Anko had never mentioned the mark her teacher had placed on her or explained what it was, likely keeping the information to herself, though she wouldn't have kept it away from the third. Did the Hokage know that Sasuke had been encouraged by Orochimaru to become his pupil? Did the higher-ups know about the Snake Sanin's presence? The Forest of Death had been completely sealed off for the test, and the nearest guards were likely several kilometers away, and if one wasn't a sensor, one wouldn't be able to sense Orochimaru. But it felt cold and eerie. He felt the hair on the back of his neck prickle as he remembered the feeling that had surrounded him when he saw Orochimaru's yellow eyes. Not even Zabuza had made him feel that way, overwhelming him less than the Sannin. Was it because Orochimaru had spent more time being a shinobi or because he had killed more people, or perhaps because he was a much more sinister man than the swordsman? Naruto hadn't known the Sannin's behavior beyond that confrontation, where he had made it clear that he was a completely different person than how someone would think a Sannin was, although he hadn't disappointed him or anything like that either. He hadn't had any expectations about Orochimaru because he didn't even know him or because he was one of his heroes, no matter how powerful and great a shinobi he was. Despite that, despite not caring what the Sannin had been and was like, the feeling he left behind was still too present, both for him and for his teammates, even though Akeno showed nothing, and Ryu seemed too busy staring at the cave wall, with a lost look. What did Orochimaru say to Akeno? Her worried gaze fixed on her fellow Uchiha. Orochimaru wanted her for his plans, for whatever it was, and she had been on the verge of agreeing to go with him, to become his student and protege away from them. What could he offer her that would have gotten her to the point of considering his offer? Because she wasn't an idiot. Akeno hadn't looked him in the eye since the confrontation with the Sannin, and it was for no other reason than the man's words, which were fixed in her mind like hammered nails. It doesn't matter. She didn't give in. The thought was comforting, Naruto had to admit, but the worry was there, lodged in the depths of his mind, like something that could end up happening and force him to make a decision. Could he convince Akeno not to go with the Sannin? Or would he have to accept that fact and let her go, making her an enemy of the village? Doubts had begun to invade him, unable to stop them even when he tried, with all the strength of his mind and soul. Pushing those thoughts aside, Naruto looked at Sasuke, Sakura, and Kaido. They were on the other side of that natural cave, situated under a huge ancient tree, which protected them from prying eyes and from any possible enemies who might be searching for them. I see. Naruto stood up, becoming the center of attention. Frowning, he walked towards the cave exit, hearing Akeno and Ryu following behind him, wordlessly following behind them, the echo of their footsteps trailing behind them. Sakura was bewildered, looking dubiously at her companions and them, deciding to follow them as well. 3 people were waiting for them outside the cave, wearing gray, military-themed uniforms, led by a man with a bandaged face and a ninja headband shining on his forehead with the symbol of Otsutsuki, the small village that had only sent one team and were the same ones who attacked Kabuto. I understand now. Wrinkling his nose, Naruto stopped about 20 paces away from the Otsutsuki genin, his brow furrowed and his hands shoved in his pockets. Compared to them, he was much shorter, more like a true genin, but these three probably weren't true genin and were hiding their potential, like Kabuto did, even though he was a member of Konoha. Silence fell between the two teams as they stared at each other, with the Otsutsuki team searching with their gaze, albeit almost subtly. A less observant person wouldn't have noticed, but he had noticed, and he didn't even doubt that Akeno had picked up on the movement of the Oto girl's eyes. I suppose, the voice of the leader, the bandaged man, caught the attention of the two-colored Uzumaki, that the Uchiha is inside that cave, or am I wrong? You don't, Naruto admitted to Sakura's surprise, but that doesn't mean we're going to back down. The bandaged man looked slightly surprised when his one visible eye widened slightly, but it didn't take long for his expression to return to a serious, almost cold state. The other male member of the team, on the other hand, laughed in amusement, as if it had all been a joke. But Naruto's eyes paused for a moment before a mocking smile appeared on his lips. Are you serious, kid? Ha 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 ha. As if a skinny tiny kid like you could defend the Uchiha. The Kendo tried to take a step forward, but Naruto stopped her with his arm, still in his relaxed pose. This gesture made Akeno frown, gripping the handle of her katana tightly, eager to draw it. I meant it. If anyone ever kills Sasuke Uchiha then it will be because I killed him. Her throat dried up very quickly, and Sakura almost fell to her knees when she heard those words. Oh? The girl from the Otsutsuki team smiled maliciously. Are you a teammate killer? I wouldn't call him that when Sasuke isn't my partner. Then why don't you let us do it, kid? I like the idea of him being my prey at some point, he shrugged. Throughout my life, I've never had anything that's mine, but Sasuke is mine to kill. Oh. Well, I'm afraid we'll have to take the candy out of your hands, kid, the bandaged man admitted, taking a step forward. A kunai shot out, lightly slicing into his right sleeve, surprising him. Are you going to fight? We're both the leaders of our teams. Akeno glared at Naruto, and Ryu pouted. It's only fair, isn't it? The bandaged man didn't reply, and his two companions' eyes stared at him intently, waiting for his answer. Finally, he gave a sigh that could have been mistaken for a mocking laugh and took a couple of steps toward Naruto. If you want to die, brat, it's fine by me. I have no problem killing you. Are you sure, Dosu? Kin. Zaku. Stay away from that brat with highlights. On the other hand, whenever you get the chance, kill his companions if they move and the pink-haired girl. But this impertinent one is mine. Both Naruto and Dosu walked to the center of the two teams, neither taking their eyes off the other, showing serious and calm faces, exuding too much confidence. You still have time to get out of the way, boy. I want to check. Dosu's arm moved quickly and Naruto stumbled slightly, taking the blow directly to his stomach, causing him to retreat a couple of steps back. He who warns is not a traitor. Dosu grabbed Naruto's hair, looking at him with malicious mockery, before slamming him hard into the ground before the astonished gaze of Team 11 and Sakura, who covered her mouth with her own hands. Ah! Naruto slowly lifted his face from the ground and covered his mouth with his right hand. He was bleeding profusely, probably from some cut on his face and oral cavity. That caught me off guard, man. But the next attack was not long in coming, and Naruto met it with his face. He was thrown backwards, rolling like a ball and was sitting on his butt with his head thrown back by the blow. His nose was broken. I warned you, Dosu said, walking toward the Uzumaki, showing his right arm. You can't beat me in close combat, kid. Trembling, Naruto stood up. His mind was racing, his options unfolding, and he wasn't even thinking about the blood staining his shirt. How could it have caused him to feel dizzy? Every time Dosu attacked him, he ended up feeling dizzy, as if he couldn't stand, as if he had vertigo. You warned me, right? Naruto gritted his teeth as the third blow sent him feet away from the entrance to the natural cave, damaging his left arm. But now I understand why you defeated Kabuto, even though he hides his power from all of us. You're no better than you think, and your skills are probably far below what you'd have us believe. Oh, yeah? What did you find out, kid? Naruto pointed at Dosu's right arm. You manipulate sound and have damaged my inner ear 3 times, just before hitting me. I've never had vertigo in my life, and to have it now is a little too strange, Naruto admitted, wiping the blood from his chin. Or am I wrong? Dosu stopped in his tracks and laughed, amused by the boy's sharp mind. Ahahaha. Well, what a sharp mind. He stopped the laughter that was coming out of his mouth and looked at the Uzumaki with his dark eye. But despite having discovered it, you can't stop me. Oh, it doesn't really matter if I stop you or not, Naruto cracked his neck, massaging the right side with his left hand. Fighting without one of my senses that gives me balance is just another test to overcome. Chapter 14. Balance was tied to a person's inner ear, and so when a person experienced vertigo, they would stagger and even fall, as if they had lost the ability to walk and everything was spinning around them. This effect was replicated in Dosu's techniques when he manipulated sound, affecting his enemies' inner ears, causing discomfort and an inability to walk in a coordinated manner, leaving them vulnerable to any attack. Dosu would take advantage of this to strike or even kill his enemies, using any weapon at hand. He was an almost invincible shinobi. Almost. The dark eye of the Atogakure team leader watched, with some surprise, as his target remained standing, affected by the waves he manipulated with his tool. Blood trickled from his ears, staining the top of his shirt. However, Naruto didn't seem worried about receiving Dosu's wave attack and didn't give any importance to his inner ear injury, as if it weren't bleeding constantly. He remained standing, the focus of all eyes. His arms were relaxed, even his head tilted slightly forward, noticing how his ears were wet, as if there was water in them, but it was nothing other than the blood from the injury Dosu had caused. His chin, of course, also had traces of blood, and his shirt was stained from the first blow from the bandaged man, who continued to look at him as if he were an anomaly. Could it be Zoro's doing? Naruto grimaced as he dug one of his fingers into his sore ear, cleaning and freeing some of the blood before it dried, and he felt a stinging sensation as he did so, as if he were touching a freshly opened wound, though he could already tell they were healing abnormally. Orochimaru's seal has not affected regeneration. Are you just going to stand there, brat? Dosu's question brought him out of his thoughts. He lifted his head, scratched the back of his neck, and massaged the right side of his neck. I don't have all day. And I have to kill the Uchiha. Dosu lunged forward and swung his arm in a jab straight at his enemy's face. The sound wave struck the Konoha genin, even though the blow didn't physically connect with his body, and he staggered, nearly falling to his knees. It doesn't need to connect to hurt my sense of balance. He jumped back, evading the next blow and skidded backwards, grabbing several kunai by the handle and throwing them with a fluid movement of his arm, causing the projectiles to shoot towards Dosu with the intention of hitting his limbs and incapacitating him. Clank. Without much ceremony, Dosu deflected each of the projectiles aimed at him. They ended up stuck in the ground on either side, inert and harmless, and he didn't even bother to give them a second glance. Boom. The explosion of the bomb seals engulfed the Atagakur genin, completely covering him in a dark cloud and scorching the grass beneath his feet. But that didn't seem to have killed him. Dosu stepped out of the flames directly toward Naruto, swinging his right arm for a fourth or fifth blow that he hoped would shatter the Uzumaki's ears and bring him to his knees. Naruto pulled his right arm back into himself and closed his hand tightly, perhaps too tightly and too quickly, so that the wire attached to his limb groaned slightly before cutting with a snap that reached Dosu's ears, but not fast enough for him to avoid the rain of kunai and shuriken that fell on him and forced him to take cover. I must damage that tool he uses. Taking advantage of the rain of thrown objects, Naruto launched himself at Dosu with a kunai in his hand and his eyes fixed on his target's right forearm. He pushed the kunai towards the area he wanted. Plank. Dosu reacted to Naruto's movement by using his forearm and pushing it towards the boy's kunai, causing the force of the stab to be much less, thus not affecting the tool, and allowing it to hit the boy's face with force, sending him back several meters, probably with his teeth shattered. Ha! Trying to attack this, he raised his right arm, showing off his tool makes you a target, kid. A very predictable one. Taking a deep breath, Naruto felt his teeth shift from the blow. When he covered his mouth and spat, some of them ended up on his hand, covered in blood and saliva, which wasn't a very comforting sight. Now that he knows what I'm going for, it won't be easy to destroy him. He threw his teeth to the ground and stood up, squinting at the enemy genin and thought. Why hadn't Dosu used any jutsu besides his use of his arm tool? Didn't he have some chakra nature? Hadn't he discovered it yet? Why not use ninja tools? Each one of those questions hammered at his mind, and Naruto let them float there in the pool of ideas as they sank, disappeared, or took hold in his head. He relies too much on that musical contraption. The shinobi should rely on their skills and strength, as well as their intelligence. But shinobi and kunoichi who relied entirely on a tool, created weaknesses in their strategies and styles, which at that moment was an opportunity for Naruto to defeat Dosu in a much simpler way, although his own skills didn't give him many tools. He reached into the carrying case he was carrying and pulled out 3 shurikens, which he held in his bare hand, feeling the cold of the metal, in contrast to the warmth of his own skin. He fixed his eyes on Dosu, scanning him and looking for any weakness to exploit. You might have thought your tool wasn't damaged, but it's just a crack. He moved his arm and threw the shurikens towards Dosu. You're not going to do anything by doing the same thing, brat. The sound waves expelled by Dosu's forearm deflected the shuriken until they stuck in various places, but none of them hit his body. When he was sure the boy wouldn't throw any more, he leaned forward and shot toward him. Rush. Naruto jumped back in surprise. A line cut through his shirt at the neck, revealing his undamaged skin. In his left hand, Dosu displayed a knife with which he tried to ruthlessly pierce his target's neck. But the Uzumaki had distanced himself and moved his neck away from his enemy's knife. At the same time, he pulled the ninja cables attached to the shurikens and swung them, attacking his enemy's back without taking his eyes off him. Dosu reacted by spinning on his feet, but turned his back on Naruto, who took advantage of the distraction to attack him at the same time that the throwing weapons flew towards his enemy, who was deflecting the shurikens using his forearm. Crack. The two collided. Dosu used his right forearm and Naruto his left, creating a small wave of wind. At this, Dosu smiled, ready to activate the tool on his forearm and destabilize the Uzumaki. But the preteen was much faster than the adult and forcefully thrust a kunai directly into the sonic tool, catching his enemy off guard. You idiot brat. The explosion of the machine generated a flash that almost completely engulfed Dosu's right arm. The resulting flames greeted just above the elbow, licked the man's shoulder and burned the protective fabric. However, they disappeared after a few seconds, leaving a bare cold black limb wrapped in ash and dark smoke. You said I couldn't destroy that thing. Naruto caught the kunai he threw in the air, but I did, and now you don't have a way to fight me, do you? Damn brat. Dosu grabbed the edges of the scorched sleeve and tore off the fabric, revealing the entire limb. The skin was black, almost charred, with a few sores poking through the blackened, sooty flesh. I'm going to have to kill you. I'm not going to let you defeat me. Dosu's bravado was something Naruto saw through instantly. His smile faltered, his one visible eye not even twinkling as he tried to speak with the confidence he lacked. The man had no more tools, no more skills to confront him, and he was completely defenseless unless he tried to approach him head-on, which would involve them in a direct physical confrontation, and Dosu didn't seem like the man with the greatest physical potential. You can try, Dosu, the boy admitted, glancing sideways at his companions, but if I beat you in the first round, why wouldn't I beat you in the second? Dosu seemed to consider those words while remaining completely silent, his eyes fixed only on Naruto and not noticing anyone else. The Uzumaki was completely occupying his entire vision. DSK brat. Now, leave your scroll, the blue-eyed man requested, taking a step forward, which Dosu's companions imitated. At the same time, Akeno and Ryu flanked him. I want to take your scroll, even if it's the same one we have. Watching you crawl to get the scrolls will be my satisfaction. He might, in a way, be sounding rude and conceited as if he had already won, but Naruto had no doubt in his victory over Dosu. The man was without tools, without any real power to stop him or his companions, and he would have to involve his own companions for a confrontation. Suddenly, Naruto's thoughts faded and a dark aura made him and the others, except Sakura, turn towards the entrance of the cave. What is this? The echo of footsteps reached them. Soft, gaining strength. Idiot. Naruto growled. Sasuke came out of that natural cave wrapped in a dark chakra, with purple tones, with marks covering the right side of his body, and his eyes looked at him. They were those of a monster. Chapter 15. The stench that oozed from the chakra surrounding Sasuke Uchiha made anyone with an above-average sense of smell flinch, causing Naruto to wrinkle his nose, feeling for the first time that his senses had changed and his sense of smell seemed more developed. But the Uzumaki wasn't focused on his own nose, his enhanced hearing, or his improved eyesight. His eyes were scanning the Uchiha's body, imprinting on his mind the tribal pattern that had appeared and covered his former comrade's body, covering nearly his entire left side with inky black markings. His previously black eye was now a deep dark yellow, with black sclera, much blacker than the markings, making his yellow eye that much more visible. And it didn't look like him. Sasuke was proud, self-centered, and possessed enormous abilities that came from his own blood, with enormous potential to become one of Konoha's greatest shinobi if he truly wanted to. But the Sasuke who emerged from the cave wasn't the self-centered man Naruto had known. His expression was much darker, with an intense gaze that quickly swept over everyone present and fixed on Dosu in an instant, causing the man to take several steps back, as if he'd been pushed. And such a dark attitude wasn't typical of the Uchiha, even if he was usually an emo. The footsteps stopped and Sasuke stood next to Sakura, but he didn't look at her. His back was facing the girl, so she could see the Uchiha symbol printed on the back of his shirt, a symbol that represented the pride of one of the important clans in the village, one that had built Konoha itself. And yet, that pride was devoured. Sasuke's mouth moved, before his jaw tensed slightly and clenched for a few moments, as if he were internally debating with himself. It took him several seconds before he let out a sigh and spoke to Sakura, looking at Dosu. Who attacked you? Sasuke didn't look at Team 11 or notice the wound on the Atogakure team leader, placing Naruto aside, not thinking that he had been the cause of the fight. His mind, enveloped in the dark power, was focused on only one thing. Fighting. It was. Who? The words were lost in the Kunoichi's mouth and she merely raised her arm, pointing toward Dosu and his companions, the nervous trembling in her limb visible. And Sasuke only reacted to the gesture. Thump. Pam. The impact generated a wave of wind that shook the tree branches. Sasuke was thrown backward and in the middle of the crash, a small crater was created between him and the person he had collided with. You should control that bloodlust. Naruto had taken a kunai with his right hand and his left arm could be seen slightly reddened, with the fabric of his shirt torn by the clash with his former teammate. Why are you intervening, dope? Sasuke swung the arm he'd used to clash, the one he'd tried to stab through Dosu's head. He'd had to move it differently to make it his protection and not a stabbing weapon. Tests are supposed to allow you to kill others, he continued, now looking at Naruto. Don't interfere in what doesn't concern you. Really? It doesn't concern me. It's supposed to be my fight, you conceited idiot. Thumb. She reacted to that tone, it didn't take long for her to wait, and Sasuke disappeared from sight, reappearing behind his former partner moving his leg horizontally. Naruto. Orochimaru had worked for years to form the different cursed seals, with which he marked each of his followers, until he arrived at the one he used to mark Sasuke Uchiha. It was the best seal, the one that improved the abilities of its bearer, the same one that would turn the Uchiha into the perfect body. It was impossible for a person without external improvement to match phase 1 of the cursed seal. Pam. Naruto skidded, surprised by Sasuke's attempted attack, but his surprise was greater when he saw the person who had stopped the blow that was going directly for his neck. If you were to give me. Why is everyone interfering? Sasuke spun around, switching to his left leg, and threw a second punch at his opponent's unprotected area. Sasuke pushed him away slightly and raised his opposite arm to block the second kick. When he attempted to twist his body to throw a downward punch, his opponent pushed him back with his hand, reacting before he could hit. Ryu thinks Sasuke team is being an idiot. Ryu is a good boy and he needs to be taught a lesson. Don't intervene, idiot. Furious, Sasuke lunged forward, throwing a kunai as he spat out a massive fireball at his target. His intention was to scare the redeed, making him retreat and flee, leaving him a clear path towards Naruto. But that wasn't what he did, and he remained standing between his partner and the Uchiha. With his feet planted on the ground, Ryu puffed out his chest and leaned back. In the next second, he expelled an immense wave of wind that dispersed the fireball in different directions, turning it into small flames that fell to the ground, but without the strength or intensity to start a fire. If you were trying to stab Ryu, the Redeed showed the kunai to his opponent, his eye shining maliciously. Ryu must say you can't do it. Surprise flashed across Sasuke Uchiha's stern face. A drop of sweat trickled down his right temple to his chin, dripping onto the ground at his feet. What had he felt when the Redeed's eye had locked on him? Was it fear? At that question, Sasuke vehemently shook his head and straightened, ready to launch himself at the Uzumaki. But Ryu was ready too and responded. When Sasuke was inches away from Ryu, the Redeed grabbed Sasuke's wrist and threw him to the other side, spinning around, his feet planted on the ground. Sasuke spun in the air and landed on his feet. Ryu is a good boy and he's going to beat you to your senses. Right. Left. Knee strike. Deflect. Block. Ryu and Sasuke traded blows, their confrontation becoming a dance for those watching. While the Uchiha tried to increase his landing, the red-haired Uzumaki took care of deflecting every blow, using his forearms and slamming both hands into Sasuke's chest, sending the preteen stumbling back several steps, Ryu's handprints etched into his shirt. GHN. He wiped the blood from the corner of his lips, staring at the red color on his thumb. Sasuke closed his hand and moved his attention to the Redeed. I'm going to kill. The blow went straight to Sasuke's chin. The fist connected directly with the boy's chin, his knuckles touching the bone beneath the skin in the blow, nearly shattering it. Sasuke was thrown backward, rolling on the ground and landing on his back, blood trickling down his shattered chin. Ryu thinks Sasuke team won't wake up for a while. Slowly the marks receded towards the seal and disappeared from the boy, leaving his white skin in view. Ryu has sent him to sleep. Naruto breathed heavily and sank onto his butt, sweat beading his forehead. For a single instant, he'd felt the heaviness of Sasuke's chakra, how foul and repulsive it was. It had dulled his senses, and he'd been surprised when Sasuke attacked him, something he hadn't expected. He and Sasuke hated each other now, but he hadn't expected Sasuke to try to kill him just for interfering in a fight. It's burning. The kendo had crouched down beside Sasuke and placed her hand on his forehead, noticing that his skin was much hotter than before, as if he had developed a fever. Let's take advantage, Dosu. Naruto and Ryu looked at the Itagakure team. The three genin disappeared from sight, leaving behind the scroll they had been carrying. Ryu thinks this will work for us. It's the opposite of what we have. Perfect then, Naruto took the scroll and put it inside his storage case. We have both the heaven and earth scrolls. We should head for the tower and not delay any longer. We don't know what might happen. Are you going to leave them? The figure fell into the clearing, dressed in a full-body green garment, a garment that didn't seem too protective or likely to cover everything. The figure belonged to a young boy, a year older, with dark bowl-cut hair and huge eyes on a round face, on which a smile seemed to want to bloom when he looked at Sakura, but his eyes moved towards Team 11. It's not our job to look after them, Akeno said, standing up. We've already gathered the scrolls, and that's enough for our work. We must keep moving, or we'll be as lost as you. Akeno's words made the bull-haired boy frown, but he didn't say anything. He turned to Sakura and walked over to her, not even sparing a glance at the rest of Team 11, and crouched down in front of her. We're unnecessary, Akeno took Ryu's arm and grabbed Naruto, dragging them out of the clearing. Let's go. Let me know in the comments below if you guys want the next part. Also check out my other video that has been shown and left. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video please like and share this video. And have a fantastic day. Bye.